Notre Dame fans, welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Today, we're going to do a bit of an impromptu mailbag. Today, it's going to be me and Sean Davis. Sean Davis is now joining us live. Sean, thanks for being with us. We're just getting started here.
All right, my pleasure. How's everyone doing today?
I'm tapped out, Sean. You know, we're talking about topics, and I'm like, man, I got a million topics, but I got none. And then so I started getting a lot of questions from people about recruiting and some other things. And so I figured, you know what? Let's just do an impromptu mailbag. So you like to talk, I like to talk, so I figure the mailbags would go okay. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to dive into some topics. Tomorrow we'll preview the recruiting weekend, talk about a couple other things, and then Friday we'll have another mailbag. So don't worry, this is not going to replace the Friday free for all. We're just going to have a little impromptu Wednesday deal, and we're just going to talk about whatever you want to talk about. I know there's some topics that we'll get into. A lot of people asking about offensive line recruiting. We'll certainly get into that and have some conversations, because that's a subject that is going to be very divisive with people. It just tends to be, and I'm sure there's going to be people that will see both sides of it here. But that's kind of what we like to do, right, Sean? I mean, we like to talk about things, and as Sean and I have talked about off the air, there is no we all have to be on the same page on a topic thing here at Irish Breakdown. So there's no sort of company direction we have to take things. It's right. Whatever you think, as long as you can defend it, it's whatever you think. And that's what we'll do today. So I'm really curious to see what people have to say, but we're going to get started here with Tony Stengel. Said also saw Wisconsin has special uniforms for the Chicago game. Since it's a Shamrock Series game, I'm sure Indy will have some too. I love the finish of this question, Sean. Any word on when those come out and how awful they will be? Not a lot of optimism on the Notre Dame Shamrock jersey, Sean. I haven't heard anything.
The Shamrock jerseys are probably at about a 50% approval rate over the years?
Yeah, and they've been really hit or miss. Some of them I've really liked, and some of them have been just like, really bad. And it's funny is usually when I like them, it's everybody else hates them. So I've come to realize I have no taste. So I just, I like the all green ones that they wore in Boston. I liked them until the game started.
Right.
Because then I'm up in the press box in Fenway, and we're looking down. So they have the way that this happens with baseball fields is the same way in Yankee Stadium. But when we were up in the press box at Fenway, we're basically looking straight through the goalposts. So we're like doing, tight copy view all day.
Right.
The numbers were the same colors as the jerseys, and the outlines weren't real strong. So, they look sweet, up close, but far away, it's like, I have no idea what number that is.
Yeah, you can't follow the player or who's making a tackle.
And they didn't look great on TV, but up close and personal, they looked awesome. I like the Yankee Stadium uniforms. A lot of people didn't like those. I thought they were sweet. A lot of people like the 2013 Arizona State one, the all white with the gold. Yeah. I thought those were pretty good. Didn't like the 2012 Miami ones. 2013.
We did like that helmet, right? I think it was something.
I didn't like that one. Like the one where it was half blue. Yeah. I didn't like that one.
The Purdue game.
That's the one I liked.
That's the one we liked.
That was 2014, I think. Yeah. I can't remember what was 2013. What was the Shamrock game of 20? Because I wasn't covering the team that year, so I kind of forget which one that was. But I know 2011 was Maryland. That was in D.C. I'm trying to remember what the 2013 Shamrock Series game was. I'm going to try to pull it up here and see if I can remember. That's what happens those couple years where I didn't cover the team. I don't quite have the Saints. That was Arizona State. Okay, that's the all-white Arizona State ones that everybody liked. 2014 was Purdue. Yep, 2014 was the Purdue ones that I really liked in Lucas Oil. 2015 was the all-green in Boston. 2016, I blocked that year out of my head. It didn't exist. 2017 was, let's see, what was 20? Was there I don't think there was a Shamrock game in 2017, was there?
Last one was 16, I believe, right?
Yeah, 7. Then they had the alternate uniforms they wore in 17 were against Navy at home. Remember they wore those old school with the Newt Rockney looking ones. I'm trying to think some of the alternate uniforms they've had. I don't. 2018, Florida State at home. I did not like those. Those bright green jerseys that just nothing else was different except the bright green jerseys. I didn't think those looked good. And then what was the alternate uniform in 2019? I'm trying to remember that one.
Was that 13 a year? The Arizona State, was that the year they had the gold helmet with the gold cloth?
Yeah. Yeah, green clove, and
Oh,
then it was all white.
yeah,
I thought those looked pretty slick.
yeah,
I did like the what year was it? The year they played at Michigan, 2011, and they had those throwback, those old no with the green stripes, and they had the clover on the helmet.
yeah,
Remember that? Now the game didn't end the way, but I've blocked out the last 3 minutes of that game, so
yeah.
you
That
know
was
the first 57 were great. My favorite ones were 2019. Those alternate uniforms, the 88 throwbacks they wore in 88 in against Boston College in 2019. If they switch that to their full-time uniforms, I'd be a happy dude. Very happy dude. So, but I would imagine, to answer his question, I would imagine it'll come out closer to fall camp or sometime during fall camp. Notre Dame usually releases it when we get closer to fall camp or early on. Here we go. So Sean, we're going to talk
Wisconsin. So sad. Wisconsin's going to waste a special uniform on a L.
Yeah, it is disappointing. I feel kind of bad for him.
Yeah.
I really do. I've always held a special place in my heart for Wisconsin's uniform, Sean, because my first year of coaching was at Wittenberg University, and we basically have mocked Wisconsin's uniforms. I mean, it's the same thing as Wisconsin's uniforms, but in person, they look kind of sweet. I just like that red. It looks really good. And today we're going to talk a lot of recruiting, Sean, and we're going to have a lot of questions about offensive line recruiting. And Kyle Dolan has already thrown down the gauntlet, and I'm curious to see what this number is. So Kyle Dolan says, what's the over-under on how many times Brian says, let it play out today? It's going to be a lot, Kyle. Tommy Leonard says, Kyle, let's set it at 20.5. So somebody's going to have to count. Okay, Tommy, that's if you're driving, okay, I understand you drive a lot, so you may not be able to. Somebody needs to play it out. So like once I actually say it, not repeating the question, but say it, somebody needs to be counting how many times I say let it play out today, because that's going to be something that I comment on quite a bit today. Yeah. No question about it. So let's just dive right into it. And Colin C asks, what is the latest on Billy? And this is what I love about this group, Sean. So far, the questions that I've put up have been before the show started. Kyle Dolan put his question up 39 minutes before the show started. I love this group of people. Colin C says, what is the latest on Billy Schrouth? That is the offensive lineman from the state of Wisconsin. Speaking of Wisconsin, thought he would be committed by now, starting to have doubts that he will end up in the class because how long he is taking. I have similar concerns. Look, so I've had 4 or 5 people text me this morning, like Tom Loy's reporting that he's not confident in it, and that the Wisconsin writer apparently at 24/7 did a crystal ball for him. I haven't seen those. I can't give you any new information other than what Tom's reporting. And, if Tom's putting that out there, then I trust that that's where it's headed, because Tom's pretty good with those kind of things. So I haven't heard anything on my end. I haven't heard anything new on my end other than just the longer he waits, the more concerned people are getting. This is going to be, if they lose him to Wisconsin, it's going to be a huge, huge blow. He was the most likely to end up in this class from that group of 3. And again, I said yesterday, we'll talk more about that when a decision is made.
Yeah.
But right now, it's not looking good. But this is a kid that was expected to be in the class and be in the class for some time. And look, there's 3 stud offensive linemen in Wisconsin. At one point in time, it looked like Notre Dame might get 2 of them. Now it's kind of trending to where Notre Dame might not get any of them. And, I'm sorry, that's just unacceptable.
And that right there is a coup. If they were able to get 2 out of the 3.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about kids that have to sneak out of and get by the borders of not only Wisconsin, but Iowa as well, to the west. And like you said, when you look at this kid's offer sheet, we talked about this. There's certain schools you look for when you're talking about a certain position. And when you look at the offer sheet for Charlotte, and then you see that Iowa and Wisconsin
and Ohio State.
Ohio State.
Ohio State's also offered all 3 of them, and they're trying to recruit all 3 of them.
Yeah, that lets you know.
Yeah,
this kid is pretty good. And like you said, it would be a huge blow if they did in the class.
Well, and especially since Notre Dame, I mean, there was a stretch, a period of times where, based on all my information, my gut, my read, but also things I was being told, Notre Dame was the clear leader for Schrouth. I mean, clear leader. And I'll have more once his decision comes out one way or the other. And they were leading for Carson Hinsman for a while too. And now you're looking at, trailing for both of them. So there's some concerns. I'm not gonna spin it. There's concerns about where things are headed right now. But to the question, we got to let it play out.
Yeah.
We got to let it play out and see how it goes. Because again, right now we're June 23rd. Things aren't looking great. But, look, this is still Notre Dame, right? This is still O-line U. They're still guys that they should be able to go flip. You know, if they pick Wisconsin now, stay on them. That's going to be my big thing. Stay on them. Don't stop recruiting them. You're going to get a chance in, late September, early October to kind of make a little statement about why they should be picking Notre Dame instead of Iowa. So, Wisconsin. So we'll see if that one we'll see how that one plays out, but it's certainly not trending in the right direction for Notre Dame. And look, I always say follow actions, right? What are the actions they've offered? They offered Ryan Baer a couple weeks ago from Ohio, a kid from Ohio that does not have an Ohio State offer. They offered Ashton Craig, an in-state kid from Indiana, who I actually like, and we can talk about him if people have questions about him. You can ask about him. We can dive more into him, but the reality is he is a Plan B kid, and that's something else we're going to talk about during the show too. Is we talked about it last week, but we have to kind of look at Plan Bs. I don't like the terminology because immediately when people say Plan B equals can't play or not good. Kyron Williams was a Plan B for Notre Dame.
Right.
Okay, he was. They missed out on their top targets. They went to Kyron Williams. Sean, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention last year. Was Kyron Williams pretty good?
He's pretty good.
Okay.
Probably going to be an All-American this year.
Okay, so he was decent, right? So Plan B guy turned out pretty good.
Decent.
Okay. Yeah. Ian Book was a Plan B. We have our thoughts on Ian Book, but he was a 3-year starter at Notre Dame, right?
He was a winner,
right?
Yeah.
So look, we just have let's let the class develop. See, I found another way to say that without saying it, so we don't add another to the count. But we're gonna have to see how it goes. See, Kyle's gonna make me self-conscious this entire show, Sean, about saying let it play out. Colin has another question. Is Jake Pope still a guy who could commit in the near future? It seemed like he loved his Notre Dame visit, but haven't heard a ton about him since. Look, the reason you're not going to hear a ton about him since is, number one, how many times can we tell the same story, right? I mean, if you read these articles after visits, it's kind of everybody's saying the same thing, right? Loved his visit, doing great. If I interviewed him again 3 days later, what else am I going to hear? So if we said he loved his visit and everything is looking good and Notre Dame feels good about where they stand and we don't say anything afterwards, it's because there's no new information to report.
Yeah.
What we've also said is we have to he's going to take his visits, right? He went to Ohio State a week after Notre Dame. He's going to go to Alabama next. And as we've said this entire process, visits are going to have a lot more sway on kids this year than they have in the past. And we've already started to see that in Notre Dame's favor.
Yeah.
But, with a guy like Nicholas Singleton, but we've also seen that with a guy like Billy Strouth, how it's potentially working against him. So I don't want to necessarily say, yes, they're going to get him or no, they're not, or I'm worried. I'm just saying I haven't heard anything from anybody in Notre Dame that tells me that they don't feel any less great about where they stand with him than they did before.
And with recruiting, it's all about staggering the rushes, right? And it's hard for fans because, you get into these months and you see the rush of commits and then you want them to keep going.
Right.
But it slows down.
Right.
Heading into camps, coaches and players start getting into the summer camp preparing for the season. And things will rev back up once the season starts and you start getting the official visits and getting kids into games and on campus. And once the fall hits, November, December, all the news will start building up and guys will start cutting their teams down and posting their top 5s, top 3s, and all of that stuff. And it'll rev back up again. It's just typical. So
and we also have to get out of this notion of if it doesn't happen soon, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I've tried to explain this as much as possible, especially with Notre Dame. Notre Dame does not push kids to commit.
Yeah.
They just don't. I mean, they want to make sure that the kid commits once and it's a done deal. And if you're Notre Dame, I would and this is how I feel. I would rather lose you and not get you ever than to get you to commit and then you have second thoughts and then you go down and you end up decommitting. That's to me the worst scenario.
It's a very unique school, very unique situation, and you want people that want to be there. Want to play for the university. And it's a gift and a curse sometimes, Brian. Right. It really is, especially in recruiting.
But I think that perception of losing commits hurts Notre Dame more than it does other people. And that's why I say I'm totally fine with Notre Dame saying, hey, look, we'd rather you be sure than to commit and then decide later that you're going to go somewhere else. Colin C. also asked, do you think someone from last weekend could commit to Notre Dame soon? Again, that's the thing, is I'm not worried about soon. Also, do you think Tobias Merriweather commits soon, or will he drag his recruitment out a little bit? He's got one more visit coming up. I believe he's going to Stanford this weekend. He hasn't said. He's said from the beginning that he wants to carry his recruitment out, and that's why I've been a little concerned about his recruitment. I've also said if he commits this summer, it will be to Notre Dame. I don't know what his plan is. He hasn't said anything other than what he's reported all along, which is he's going to make his decision. Now, based on where things are right now, Notre Dame is in a great position with Tobias Merriweather. Yeah. Great position. They did a great job on his visit. He's kind of been sort of down to Notre Dame and Stanford, and then Oregon's in it a little bit, and Washington's in it a little bit, but it's Notre Dame, it's Stanford, and I feel good about where Notre Dame is at here. But he has said all along he's going to let it play out. I hope that changes, and I think Notre Dame's done a pretty good job of putting him in position, putting him, as a priority to let him know, like, hey, we really want you. And I think maybe with all these recruits, these receiver recruits coming on campus, that could be the thing that Notre Dame does, to say, hey, look, we need to kind of have an idea. Even if you want to go silent because you want to do something down in January, we just need to know that you're going to come here and you're not going to take visits out anywhere else, which they've done before. They did that with Equanimity St. Brown in the past, where he committed to Notre Dame during the season and then still didn't do his deal until down the road because he wanted to do a ceremony at a school. So that was the thing with him. So do I think that they'll get some guys from last weekend soon? I think there's a good chance, again, but soon to me means by the end of the month to early July. A lot of these kids like doing these July 4th type of deals. That's just a lot of kids commit on July 4th. I mean, we saw it a couple years ago when Notre Dame got Cam Hart and Brendan Clark on July 4th. It's just kind of a cool event. It's a cool day to do it, and just a lot of kids do. So there are some kids that this is why we've talked about the silent commit thing. There's some kids that would like to do the ceremony. They want to get a video done, whatever. Mm-hmm. Junior 2 Alamaka wanted to commit on his dad's birthday. He's been in the class for a minute now, but he wanted to do it on his dad's birthday. This was a special event for him, special day for him. And you know what? If I was able to do that for my dad and, commit to Notre Dame on his birthday, you better believe I would have done that. Even though I would have committed to Notre Dame the second they offered me a scholarship, I would have maybe waited to do it for, my dad's birthday or something.
I think we all would have done the same thing.
No question.
Absolutely.
But from last weekend's visit, I'm really confident where they are with Nicholas Singleton. I really like where they are with Nicholas Anderson, the receiver out of Texas. I really like where they are with Xavier Nwankpa. Now it's just about closing, right? That's going to be the key. Now we're going to get back to some offensive line questions here. Colin C., if you were to predict Notre Dame O-line class right now, who would you have in the class alongside Tenota and Chan? Honestly, Colin, I don't know if I could even predict. I think there's an assumption that Ashton Craig is going to be in the class because he's an in-state kid. And I'd say that might be a pretty decent assumption. But my understanding is he's just getting started on people blowing up with his offers. And I think that, if I'm him, I may want to see how that plays out a little bit before I make my decision, unless he just grew up a Notre Dame fan. And so I think they're going to have to work to get him too. And yeah, he's a plan B guy, but this is a kid that's got some tools. So I would hope he'd be one of them. After that, I'm not really sure who they're going to get, to be completely honest with you. They're not going to get Jake Taylor. Zach Rice is going to be on campus this weekend. Maybe they just blow him away and he jumps into class. Maybe that's it. Maybe Blake Fisher can work his magic in the 2022 class like he worked in 2021 or a little bit. So, I mean, I'm not confident right now that they're going to get of who they're going to get. I know they're going to get guys, but I'm not confident with where they are right now. And a lot of the top guys on the board are trending in a direction that you don't necessarily want them to be trending if you're Notre Dame.
Now, I don't want to ask this question because, I don't want to make it seem like I'm down on our O-line recruiting. But that's another thing. Just the recruiting, if we go back to the previous regime, from a coaching standpoint and from a recruiting standpoint, the O-line seemed like it was sewn up before other positions.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because there's been a switch and we're starting to go out after the other positions, especially the skill positions, a little bit harder, and we're getting into deep waters. And that's another thing we really need to be happy about, right? In boxing, you're always going to have most of your talent at the welterweight division, no matter what era. You know, it was the heavyweights for about maybe a 10-year stretch, but once it crossed over into the 80s, that welterweight division for like 20 to 30 years has been the main division. I watched an interesting documentary when they had Duran, Hearns, Leonard, and Hagler all at the same time, right there in the same weight class. And it's like, if you're going to be great, you have to be willing to step in and lose. Like when you're fighting other great fighters, there's a chance you can lose. You get a rematch and you win the next one. It's the same thing with recruiting. You step into deep waters and you start battling Ohio State, you start battling Alabama. We talked last week about how important it is to start winning some of these battles with Ohio State in recruiting. You're trying to invade Wisconsin, their home turf, to get the very foundation, the foundational position of their entire program, which is their offensive line. And you're trying to take 3 or 2 of the best offensive linemen out of their state. That's a battle. But you have to love the change in direction and the willingness to go take the fight. And if you lose this one, okay. But we'll come back for the rematch and maybe we get 2 kids next year. Or down the line, maybe we steal 3 of the kids in the state. That might help out the program. But I'm just happy, and I want ND fans to be happy about the direction of the recruiting and to be happy that we're getting in those fights that previously we might have been a little hesitant to get into.
I have 2 responses to you on that, Sean. Number one is I'm disappointed that you did not include Pernell Sweepy Whitaker in your conversation. I mean, I'm from Virginia, and he fought one of the greatest welterweight fights of all time against Julio Cesar Chavez. Okay, so the fact that you didn't go there,
that was a little bit after Sugar Ray, and that.
I mean, it was '93 though. You said '80s, '90s. I mean, how do you not bring up Sweet Pea? That's all. I mean, you know, I'm just saying.
He also beat De La Hoya. They took that fight from him.
Yeah. He got screwed twice. He beat Julio Cesar Chavez. He flat out beat. It shouldn't have been a draw, and he absolutely beat Oscar De La Hoya, the flipping golden boy. Don't get me started on that one. But the other part of it too is I think that's true at a lot of positions, but I think the concern that people have, and I have it, is that this is one position that Notre Dame can't take a step back while they're taking steps forward everywhere else.
I totally agree.
That's my issue. And so, you know, you look at last year and you say, well, you know, this is the problem that I have with this conversation. We need to be able to have an honest conversation, and the honesty needs to come from both sides of this argument. And one side is going to be, well, they got Blake Fisher and Rocco Spindler. Okay, great. If you're an offensive line coach and you can't get top guys, then you shouldn't be at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
The question is what are you doing after that? The reality is in 2020, they struck out after Tosh Baker. They struck out on their next 5 or 6 guys, which is why they were late offering Michael Carmody. Now, of course, it worked out because Michael Carmody's brother went here. He wanted to go to Notre Dame, and so you were able to get him. And that's a plan B. That's a good plan B. That's a positive plan B because he's a good football player.
Yeah.
Right. But after that, you struck out. You signed 2 linemen. And now that's coming back to hurt you because now you need to go get grad transfers. Like, look, if they'd have done better with recruiting in some of the previous classes, we wouldn't need to be in a situation where Notre Dame has to go get Kane Madden to be there. They wouldn't have to be starting freshmen right now. But you missed out on your next guys. You missed out on Peter Skoronski. They slow played Peter Skoronski, who went to Northwestern and was a freshman All-American, and I was going to be an All-American, right? So that was bad recruiting. They thought they were going to get Jimmy Chris. They lost him to Virginia, where his brother went, and they stopped recruiting him. Well, then Penn State stayed on him. Things didn't go well for his brother at Virginia. His brother left. Jimmy decommitted, and he ends up at Penn State. That should have been a deal where Notre Dame stayed on him and flipped him to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about tackle issues. You know, that would have helped a little bit with that depth. You look at last year. Yeah, they got Blake Fisher. But again, you're talking about an in-state offensive lineman. When was the last time Notre Dame didn't get an in-state offensive lineman that they wanted? Right? That shouldn't be a win. Rocco Spindler was a big win, huge win. And you give him credit for that. But if you're going to give him credit for those, which Coach Quinn deserves it, and I didn't talk enough about this, going down to Phoenix, Arizona and getting Tosh Baker was big. And one of the reasons why is Notre Dame identified him way before everybody else really got on him. Yeah. That's a successful recruitment. But again, just getting 1 or 2 guys on the offensive line is going to leave you with 2 All-Americans and a mediocre offensive line. We've seen that before, right? At other places. The Notre Dame has always thrived on going 3 and 4 deep in these classes. You didn't just stop with Hainsey and Josh, and Josh Lugg in 2017. You also went out and got Aaron Banks.
Right.
And that's that third guy. You look at past classes. It wasn't just Quentin Nelson and Alex Bars. It was also Sam Mustipher. And you look at 3 and down. They didn't get a 3 in 2020. Their 3 in 2021 was either Caleb Johnson, who was a plan B guy, a guy that they passed on early, got on late because Auburn was struggling, right? They flipped him up from Auburn because Auburn was in the midst of firing their coach and having a bad year.
Right. If
Auburn's a typical Auburn, are they able to flip him from Auburn? That's a legitimate question. You look at Pat Coogan. I'm sorry, that's a plan C guy. Like, that's not a kind of plan B that I like. Joe Alt, I like Joe Alt. I've said before, if you can give me a Joe Alt every year in a 4-man class, I can live with that because he's got a very high ceiling. But there has to be that number 3, and that's what we have seen Jeff Quinn fail to do really in every full class he's put together so far. And what I mean by full classes, not classes where Harry Heastan had him leading for Quinn Carroll, Andrew Kristofic, and Zeke Carell and John Olmstead before he even took over.
Right.
That's a problem, and so you're seeing it again.
How much of it goes back? You mentioned identification and identifying guys early.
I think they're getting on guys very early. They've been on, Carson Hinsman, we've reported on, they've been recruiting him since he was a freshman in high school. They've been on Billy Strouth for a couple years now. They've been on these guys for a long time, so they're not getting into it late. They're just flat getting beat right now. They haven't gotten beat, but they're getting beat. They have to be able to get these guys. And so Notre Dame should not be having to go to basically plan C guys,
right?
Which is what some of these guys are. It's not even plan B, it's plan C.
Yeah.
You didn't get Jake Taylor. How does a program like Notre Dame struggle to recruit tackles on a consistent basis? The guys they're getting are guys that they should be getting. Where Harry Heastan was going into Urban Meyer's backyard and getting Liam Eichenberg and Tommy Kramer.
Right.
They were going out to Las Vegas and Bishop Gorman and getting Ronnie Stanley. They were going to New Jersey and beating Penn State and all those schools for Quentin Nelson. Going down to Tennessee and beating SEC schools for Alex Bars. Now, Alex Bars is a little bit different deal because his dad played here. So you had something working in your advantage if you're Notre Dame. It was kind of like Michael Carmody. Right, but Sam Mustipher beating those East Coast schools, beating Ohio State for Sam Mustipher. You have to be able to win those battles. You can't just win the easy ones, and the easy ones being, Blake Fisher, and because you're not going to have a Blake Fisher in your class every year in Indiana, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
and so that's the concern. So there are valid concerns of that. Now the good news is Jeff Quinn is still getting good top level talent. Tosh Baker in 2020, Rocco and Blake Fisher last year, but again, as we've seen. We saw it with Notre Dame last year. We saw it with Alabama last year. Both teams lost their stud centers.
Yep.
One team was much better prepared to handle that than the other one was.
Totally.
And that's a problem. That comes down to development, but also comes down to recruiting because Notre Dame didn't necessarily have any real depth at that position. So once you lost Jarrett Patterson, Zeke Carell did okay. He goes hurt, and then you're down again. And that's problematic. And we have to be able to say that without people getting their feelings hurt and saying, "Oh, you're being whatever." Call me negative. I don't really care. But if that's acceptable for you, then you're just changing the narrative of what the expectation is at Notre Dame. It's also you're saying, "Well, 10-2 is perfectly fine," right. Because hey, he's not Ty Willingham. He's not Bob Davies, not Charlie Weiss. So clearly, I can accept that and put him on the same level as Lou Holtz. This is Notre Dame. This is O-line U. You shouldn't be getting your butt kicked. You shouldn't be going 0 for 3 in Wisconsin. Now, they haven't gone 0 for 3 in Wisconsin. Right now, they're 0 for 0. All those kids are uncommitted. So let's let it play out. But if it does happen, then I can understand why people would be frustrated with it. Because as I said at the beginning, Sean, you cannot afford to take a step back when it comes to O-line recruiting and development as you improve in other areas, because then you end up right back where you were. O-line has to stay. Great development, great recruiting, all that stuff has to stay right where it's been. And then you got to bring those other positions up. You can't have them go up and them go down, because that's what we've seen at Notre Dame in the past. It's like 2015. You had the offense you needed, the defense stunk. Last couple of years you've had the defense you needed, but your offense hasn't been good enough. It's never been like everything on the same page. And that at the end of the day, that's the thing that to me is Notre Dame's had a couple teams that I felt could play for a title. Maybe not win it, but could legitimately go toe-to-toe. But they had huge flaws on those teams that kept them from winning. And that's, at the end of the day, that's where we're at. So
So
that's going to
basically,
have
what
to
you
prove.
just explained is that Notre Dame with the 3 Wisconsin kids looked really good on the ring walk. They hopped into the ring. They got out early on the scorecards. And then all of a sudden, the middle of the fight came. The scorecards got a little bit tighter. And now we're going into the championship rounds.
And it looks like Wisconsin's winning the last couple rounds, right? If you want to stick with that boxing match, they've got the momentum. They've won the last few rounds, and Notre Dame is going to have to counter with they're down on the cards. They're going to have to, it's like Rocky. What was it, Rocky 4, right? Like the Russian won all those rounds. Rocky needed to knock out to win. That's basically where Notre Dame is at this point in time with those kids. So, but they're capable of it, right?
We always have a big right hand.
Right. And this is a great opportunity for Coach Quinn, too. Yeah. Right. I think this is a great opportunity for him. Like, look, you've got these kids in Wisconsin. You're losing these kids. Okay, fight back. Go get them. Right. Get it done. Do what you got. Figure out where you're behind and go get it done.
Go get it done.
Yeah. So I think it's a little too early to kind of write the post-mortem for Notre Dame and the 3 Wisconsin kids. But, yeah, it's concerning. But they're not done yet. And even if those kids commit to Wisconsin, if Notre Dame stops recruiting all of them, that's a failure. That's just as big of a failure as not getting them in the first place.
Yeah.
Because if those kids commit to Notre Dame, you think Wisconsin's going to stop recruiting them?
Nah.
No. No. The whole state's going to still be recruiting those kids.
Absolutely.
All right, so here we go. So Colin C says, let's say for some odd reason Notre Dame doesn't land Nicholas Singleton. What do you do from there? Do you just go with Price as the lone guy? And would you try to recruit other guys? So, Sean, for me, I'm glad he mentioned Jadarian Price because I feel like I've had a lot of people say, hey, are you worried about Notre Dame striking out at running back in this class? And I'm like, that's impossible. They've already got a dude at running back. Like, they've already got a really good player running back. The question is, will they miss out on that second guy? I feel good with where they are with Nicholas Singleton. As long as they can close, I feel really good about where things stand right now. For me, if they miss out on Singleton, let's just say the momentum just completely goes away from Notre Dame and where things stand right now just completely changes and the in-state pool gets them. I would not go to plan B guys. I wouldn't. I would say just you got the 2 kids last year. Right. You got to Jadarian Price. Bring back Sebo for a 5th year if you need a 5th running back. Go get a grad transfer that's okay, playing for depth and is fine. You've got, Chase Ketterer is a walk-on kid that could be your 5th running back if you needed him to. I would ride it out with the kids you have and focus on next year. Maybe you want to get 2 more next year. That's fine. Because if you think Chris Tyree might be a guy that leaves early, then get a couple 2023 kids. They're already involved in a lot of talent. The 2023 kids, more will emerge as a lot of these kids, remember, there's going to be kids that are going to come out of the woodwork this year because a lot of these kids didn't get a chance to play seasons. Yeah. Or they had like 3 games, and there's going to be a lot of these 2023 kids, even maybe some 2022s that kind of break out this year and say, oh, and if that kind of kid emerges for Notre Dame, then yeah, I say go for him. Like if Jabron Payne comes out this year, the kid from Ohio, and he just blows up and he's still uncommitted, and all of a sudden hey, we like him even more now. He's filled out. He's back from his knee injury, and you want to go for him? Sure. Like I would not go for Emeka Megwa. I would not at all. I would not necessarily really go after anybody. Because none of the guys on the board are better than Jadarian Price. And my stance all along has been if you're going to get a second back in this class, he needs to be as good or better than Jadarian Price. Yeah. That's just how you should recruit. And to me, none of those guys are better than Jadarian Price. The only one that's on the board now that's better than Jadarian Price, and it's not by a mile, is Nicholas Singleton. And
I would agree with that.
I'd be okay.
And I'm cool with if Price is the only one that they get, I wouldn't go after a C guy either. Yeah. Watching we got off of the air. It was that last Wednesday. I immediately went to watch Singleton because I knew he was coming in based upon what we were talking about. And, I really like this kid. And I feel like what you just said, one day I can like Price better. The next day I can like Singleton better. Mm-hmm. So if you get both of those guys into the fold, it's a very good class at the running back position. And, running backs at Notre Dame, might not get the same acclaim as they go to the next level. Mm-hmm. But if you really look back at their development and what they're able to do, especially if they stick around 2 to 3 years, you have to be happy with the way things go. I was just watching the Texas game. What was that?
2015?
15. Mm-hmm. And my heart just dropped again, just watching Torian Folsom get hurt early in the game.
He'd have been so good that year.
Because he was going to be so good that season. And it would have been nice to have him going into Clemson as the veteran. So all of that pressure wasn't on CJ.
Yep.
It would have been perfect. And he showed the next year when he comes back, and that big game he had even after his knee injury in the bowl game, the toughness he showed against LSU.
Yeah, and that's the yards you were missing against.
Yes.
Yeah, that was actually that was the year before. The LSU game was the year before.
Yes.
His injury.
Yeah.
But those tough yards are what you were missing against Clemson. Because as good as CJ was as a home run hitter, CJ was not a natural running back there. He was a lot like Josh Adams. Josh Adams left a lot of yards on the field.
Yeah.
I mean, he left a lot of yards on the field that Dexter didn't leave. And Josh, because Josh wasn't the same running back as a junior that he was as a freshman. As a junior, he was looking for the home run every time. As a freshman, I felt like Josh was a guy that was a lot more of a natural running back to me. CJ was not a natural running back, and so there was yards there to be had. And I'm not talking like, oh man, he missed a shot at a 60-yard run against Clemson. No, it's on that 2nd and 6, he missed a chance to get 5, and instead he got -1 because he didn't hit the hole. Yeah. And Torian would have given you those yards, in my opinion. But you know, look, they've had. I mean, Sierra Wood went for over 1,000 yards under Brian Kelly. Theo Riddick would have gone for over 1,000 if he wasn't splitting carries so much with Sierra Wood in 2012.
Yeah,
you know, you had Torian Folson had 2 years before his injury where he was, I think, 4th among all time in Notre Dame for players in their first 2 years in rushing. He was like 4th. And then you had Josh Adams, obviously had a breakout freshman year. CJ Prosise went for 1,000 yards. That was in the same year. 2017, Josh Adams is a Heisman candidate going into November, rushed for over 1,400 yards. I think the best single season mark at Notre Dame, 1st or 2nd. You know, then you had Dexter Williams would have been over 1,000 yards if he didn't get suspended for 4 games. Right. And then Kyron Williams this past year was a 1,000-yard rusher. So yeah, I mean Notre Dame's had really good success in college, which is to me just as much of a byproduct of how good the lines have been, as anything. And that's been a key to that. But they've had some good backs, and I think that and they recruited well. If you look at, you know, when Tony Alford was here, he recruited well. When he left, they didn't recruit real well until they hired Lance Taylor, and he's recruited pretty well. Yeah, you know, and Lance Taylor last year proved that just because you miss on your look, I hammered Lance Taylor for the way that they recruited running backs last year, leading up to Will Shipley's decision. I had no problem with them recruiting Will Shipley. I loved Will Shipley. My issue at the time was you're putting all your eggs into this Will Shipley basket.
One basket, yeah.
And then when he was gone, they were scrambling. Now they got lucky that Logan Diggs was out there and he didn't have an offer from LSU at the time. Because it was hard for him to say no to LSU when he'd been committed to Notre Dame for months. If he'd have had an LSU offer, Notre Dame's not getting Logan Diggs. But they got him partly because of Terry Joseph, which is funny because Terry Joseph did a pretty mediocre job coaching recruiting safeties, but he got a pretty good running back last year in Logan Diggs. And then Coach Taylor went out and got Audric Estime. So again, it didn't start well, but what matters is how you finish. Last year at running back, I mean, if you were to say, could you only have Will Shipley or Logan Diggs and Audric Estime, I think Will Shipley is a heck of a player. Yeah. I'd rather have those 2 than that one. That's just me. So, were they both plan B guys? Yes, because if Will Shipley would have committed to Notre Dame, neither one of those kids would have ended up in Notre Dame's class, right? So, they were plan Bs, but I'll take that plan B every day. Yeah. You give me Logan Diggs and Audric Estime every year at running back, I'm good. He went out and got Jadarian Price. So he's rebounded. And that's why I said it's like, yes, Coach Quinn has had some misses, but let's give him an opportunity to rebound or not. And then if those misses become a pattern, then we can talk about it. But right now it's not a pattern yet because this class isn't done yet. So that's why I say, like, you know, that's why I keep saying, I think what do we have to now about to be number 4? Let it play out. Right? 4. All right. So we're still a long way from the over-under of 20.5. So that's where I'm coming from and so at running back, they feel good about their chances of getting Nicholas Singleton. They just got to close, right? That's the deal. They got to close on it. But if they don't, I'm going to be disappointed because you missed a chance to get a stud, a kid that I gave a 5-star upside grade to. But it's not like they're going to be hurting at running back. Does that make sense? I mean, Nicholas Singleton is a want, not a need, in my opinion.
Yep.
And there's a difference. And then there was another question about that from Coleman Smith. If Notre Dame misses on Singleton, who would be an ideal plan B if the staff decides to take him back. If they decided to take one, Jabron Payne is a guy I like from Ohio. I like Quinshawn Judkins, but I think that ship has sailed. But other than the Jabron Payne, there's not another running back I would take. I don't like Damari Alston for Notre Dame. I mean, there's a big drop off between him and Jadarian Price. I think Jabron Payne's got some upside. He had an injury in 2020, which kind of kept him out, so he didn't get a chance to kind of take that next step. He's a guy that, if I'm Notre Dame, I got my eye on to see if he fits. And then, that's assuming he's an academic fit and all that other kind of stuff. But just assuming he is, he'd be a guy that I'd take a look at. But beyond that, honestly, I'm kind of good. You know what I'd probably do, Sean, is I'd probably let the year play out and see how some kids develop, see if there's any kids that kind of break out, because again, this is going to be a weird year. This is the year where we recover from COVID when it comes from a recruiting standpoint, because all those 2023 kids are going to emerge that we didn't get to see much of last year. There's going to be some 2022 kids who would have broke out as juniors but didn't get that chance because of COVID that may break out. I'd honestly keep that spot open. And then what I would do with that spot is, find a sleeper, a kid that kind of breaks out.
Yeah.
Or B, I would still try to flip the kids that you wanted, Hayden or Singleton and Sawchuck, but especially Singleton. I'd still stay on him even if he did pick Penn State. I'd still stay on him. And then the other thing I would do is I would, if one of those two scenarios didn't work out where a kid broke out and, hey, let's go get that kid who kind of emerged as a senior, then I couldn't flip Singleton, then I'd use that for I'd go get a grad transfer. Not a starting grad transfer, but a guy that's comfortable coming in and being part of the rotation, or I'd use that scholarship somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I'd rather use that on a fifth receiver than a plan C running back, because that's really what they all would be is not really plan Bs, but even plan C guys. I would use that somewhere else. I mean, I'd just, hey, use that scholarship for some kid that, hey, if Anthony Lucas is going to take this all the way to the end, or Xavier Nwankpa is going to take it all the way to the end, or Tobias Merriweather is going to take it, use that for one of those guys.
In the back pocket, yeah.
Right. That's what I would do.
Or, another way, don't even look at it from a positional standpoint. If you just see a fantastic athlete that you think, oh, we can put this kid in the backfield, we might be able to put him in the slot.
Right.
This
kid can play DB.
You
just take him.
He can return kicks for us. You really like him? Take him. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think they need to lock into two backs in this class just because. Yeah. I don't think they need to do that. I think they've done a good enough job sticking this one. Colin C asks, how did Nick Anderson's visit go? I can't remember if you talked about it on Monday's show or not. I didn't really talk about it. I said I haven't been able to gather much information from it. I haven't been able to speak directly to Nick. No, none of us, meaning at Irish Breakdown, have been able to speak to Nick. All I've gotten from a couple people was it went really well. Notre Dame's in great position. But that was kind of what we all thought coming in. If Notre Dame wants him and offers him a spot, we've always felt that he would take it. And we'll just kind of see how that plays out. I think he's got one more visit coming up this weekend. After that, we should have an idea of where Notre Dame's board is. Because after this weekend, you're going to get C.J. Williams and Xavier Bradshaw on campus this weekend. So you're going to have all the receivers you want on campus by the end of June. And so we're going to know who what their pecking order truly is.
Yeah.
I know what mine is, but we're going to find out what Notre Dame's is at that point in time. This next question, Sean, is exactly why I keep telling people to let stuff play out. Coleman Smith asks, with Cardinal Tate now taking his third visit to Notre Dame this week in June, do you think he will be one of the first guys to commit in 2023? A week ago, people were freaking out about Ohio State and Cardinal Tate. And I just said, let it play out, right? Like, I know that's what all the sites that are driven towards, just have to make news even if there's none there, right? In the crystal balls to Ohio State and all that. I just said, what did I say? Let it play out.
Let it play out.
Right. And now all of a sudden, Cardinal Tate's taking his third visit to Notre Dame of the month. He's bringing his family back with him. And now it's the assumption is, he's going to pick Notre Dame. Not necessarily that either. Let it play out. But Notre Dame has been doing a good job on this one for a while. We have to let it play out. Now, I'll say if they're able to get Cardinal Tate in this class, that'd be a heck of a way to start the 2023 class, because that kid can flat out ball. Sean, you don't see many freshmen in that Chicago Catholic League play the way Cardinal Tate played as a freshman.
No, that's a tough league.
You just don't see it.
Yeah, it's a tough league. It's a tough league. You have schools like Mount Carmel, De La Salle, Loyola Academy, just powerhouses.
Yeah.
Like you said, I think I'm trying to think. The last freshman to come in and make an impact before him,
you have to go back to Houston, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you would have to.
Because was he at Mount Carmel at the time, right?
Mount Carmel at the time.
Yeah.
Before he eventually transferred.
Yeah. I think that's the last time I remember a really good freshman from that area.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very interesting. Colin C with another question: does Anthony Lucas have a timetable for a commitment, or is he going to let it play out into the fall? He doesn't have a timetable. I think he'd like to get it over with sooner. I don't think he's dead set on next year, but I think a lot of these kids are going to have a very fluctuating timeline. And as I explained it, I think yesterday when we were talking about Carson Hinsman, or no, Monday when we were talking about Carson Hinsman, one of the things that Carson said to me, and he's an offensive lineman saying this, if I'm not sure, I may want to take visits in the fall. Because again, all these kids missed out on game day experiences as recruits. That some of them were like freshmen and sophomores on campus, but that's different. When you're like 2 classes behind the class that they're recruiting, you're not going to get the same kind of feel that you're going to get if you're coming on campus as a recruit in the class that's getting ready to sign that year. So I think some of these kids are going to end up deciding to wait. And I think a lot of schools are trying to convince these kids to wait, because if you're fifth for a kid, you don't want him to commit this summer. You're going to try to convince him to carry it out. Or if you like a kid, but you're not ready to offer him a spot, but you're not confident where the guys ahead of him are, you don't want to take him right now, but you also don't want him committing to Notre Dame or to Ohio State or to somewhere else.
Yeah.
You may try to convince him to carry it out. So
it goes back to the experience thing you talked about, coming out of it, trying to recover from COVID-19 and everything that took place. These kids, their senses are probably heightened a little bit, and they probably want to get as much as the experience as they can.
Yeah.
And they know these schools are trying to recover and might be going above and beyond for the next 2 classes because of what happened the previous year and a half. So
I think a lot of these kids feel rushed because they've had to get everything into June. It's like all of a sudden June and the floodgates open up, and it's just been it's been overwhelming for a lot of these kids.
Yeah, and the impact of the multiple signing seasons and the changes in the legislation for coaches and when their dead period is and when they can go out on the road. Everything has changed. And I think when the early signing period came into play, for some reason, I think a lot of kids did take it as, I have to, rather than the traditional first Wednesday in February,
right,
where everybody was sitting on pins and needles.
I kind of miss that a little bit, to be honest.
I do too. It's taking a little luster away from national.
I mean, it's good for us because it gives us a lot to talk about over the summer.
Yeah,
but I kind of miss the and we talked about this in yesterday's show. Back in the day at Notre Dame, like the main recruiting period was from the December banquet to signing day.
Yeah,
that was it. That was the push. It made for. I remember being it was my first year coaching. I was at Wittenberg, and I remember this was still when Tom Lemming had his 1-800 number, and I think it was Mo Stovall was supposed to commit. I probably spent about $100 that 2 days calling Tom Lemming's 1-800 number, trying to find out if Mo Stovall had committed to Notre Dame or not yet.
Yeah,
but that's kind of how that plays out. So let's see the next question. Colin C, are there any 2023 guys who could start off that class early? Like guys who commit to Notre Dame maybe before the end of the summer. There's a few guys. I mean, I think they're in a good place with Keon Keeley, but again, a lot of these kids are not going to necessarily be in a rush to commit, and I think that's a good thing. There's probably 4 or 5 guys that could, having that maybe they decide to flip, but I'm kind of waiting until the end of June so I can talk to people and just kind of see how things went. Because part of the thing with the 2023 class too is there are some kids that I could tell you right now, I think Notre Dame could get that kid tomorrow. But Notre Dame may say, hey, we like that kid, but there's 3 or 4 other kids we like better, and we want to see how things go there before we push and open a spot up for this kid.
Yeah.
And so, but, Keon Keeley is the guy that they would certainly take right now. Cardinal Tate's certainly a guy that they would take right now. There's certainly some guys on there, but maybe I don't know if Drake Bowen's a kid that's going to be in decision making mode anytime soon. So I think they're still trying to figure some things out right now, and I think that's a good thing. Because again, if we're shooting for the stars, we're shooting for the top players. A lot of times the elite players aren't deciding this soon, and if they are, it's not going to be for Notre Dame. It's going to be to in-state U. And so I would hope that a lot of these kids don't end up committing right now. Colin C. has a lot of questions today. We still haven't gotten to the 1 o'clock point yet, Sean, in the questions at this point in time. Does the offer to Ashton Craig mean Notre Dame won't land a guy like Billy Shrouth? Starting to get a little worried for the direction of this class. It should be a good class, but hasn't filled up yet. I do think that the offers to Ryan Baer and Ashton Craig are in response to where Notre Dame feels they stand with the Wisconsin kids and Jake Taylor. I do think that's in response to it. That doesn't mean that they're out of it. It doesn't mean they're not going to get them. It just means that they're doing the smart thing of, hey, it's not looking good for us. We need to expand the board now. We can't wait till it's over, because here's the deal. If Notre Dame waited till those 3 kids decided, let's say they were all going to decide by the end of June, okay, and they wait until Shrouth, Bruner, and Hinsman all decide, and they strike out. Now you missed a chance to get Ryan Baer on campus. You missed a chance to get Ashton Craig on campus. Yeah. And now you're scrambling. So this is good recruiting, and from a strategic standpoint, to get these kids on campus and have them kind of in the pike, ready to kind of turn to should things not work out for you. You staying on Emil Wagner, even though he's basically a locked Ohio State if Ohio State wants him, but you stay on him because what if Ohio State passes on him? Yeah, you want to be there. So strategically, I think the offensive line recruiting is going very well. They've gone after very good players. They have a deeper board. When they aren't trending in a good direction, they've been able to expand the board. The problem is the strategic is good. The strategery is good. But the closing is the concern now, right? Because you can have a great strategy and strike out, and it's ends up not being a good class. But the strategy is good. They just got to close. And now it's up to Coach Quinn to kind of prove people like me and some of the people that have been critical of him over the years to prove us wrong. Go get it done. Go get those guys. That's going to be the key. Coleman says, "What do you think? Who do you think on the current team is going to sneak up and surprise people this year?" I say it would be Jordan Patelho. Sean, you have anybody in mind? I mean, I think Patelho is a good one. I think that's a good suggestion. I think Cam Hart is a guy that's on my list. I think Houston Griffith is one that I think a lot of Notre Dame fans have written off, and they're just assuming he can't play. I think he's going to have a really good year. Let's see here. Lawrence Keys is a guy that I think is going to be a really surprising player for Notre Dame this year, because he's all of a sudden going to figure out how to play receiver, right, and put up a lot of numbers this year. So, and I'll say too, who sneak up on people and surprise people this year, and I can't believe I'm saying this because it shouldn't be that way. Jack Cohn. I think Jack Cohn's going to be really good this year. And just from conversation, there's a lot of Notre Dame fans that maybe it's just a Twitter thing, but Twitter Notre Dame fans aren't high on Jack Cohn. And I'm like, man, what am I missing? Right? Like, where am I wrong? Because I really like that kid. And especially put him in a more, let's say, a more aggressive offense. I think he's going to thrive.
Well, MTA for me. I think the change in that defense, putting him on the edge, freeing him up to make more plays,
and like 20 pounds off his body,
shedding 20 pounds. Yes, I look for him to definitely surprise people, because they'll probably be used to his level of play the previous years, and I think he's really going to take a step forward and surprise a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Definitely increase, like I said, the TFLs and the sacks.
Yeah,
I definitely look for that.
If you're right on that one, it'd be huge for Notre Dame.
Oh, it's absolutely,
because I think we both agree, and I probably should have said Jason Adamiola, but I kind of feel like he's not going to sneak up on any Notre Dame fans. He might be a guy that sneaks up on people nationally. Yeah, I think Notre Dame fans have been kind of waiting on him to kind of blow up for a while. Riley Mills, Foskey, Patelho, we know what Heinisch can do. If MTA can give you a Adi Ogundiji or even a Khalid Kareem type of season, this defense is going to be even better than I thought. Yeah. I mean,
and he improves or makes the game easier. If he can do that, he makes the game easier for everybody that's next to him or behind him in the defense.
Yeah.
Basically what the linebackers or the safety that might be coming down on the rover.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. D-Rock showed up at 1 o'clock. He showed up on time, and he was like 30 questions buried. Plenty of followers checking in early and getting those front row seat questions rolling. I'm impressed. Well done, and good afternoon, everyone. Go Irish. Welcome to the show. My man D-Rock. So here we go. AJ's prepping us for his question. Gentlemen, and there's some ladies in here, so give some love to the ladies in here, AJ. Fasten your seatbelt to contain your excitement. Another question about Amorian Walker. Here we go. How would you compare Walker's film to Stephenson coming out of high school? I asked because both have similar rankings and both were very skinny. Did Stephenson look as raw as Walker does on film? No, I would not compare them. If you remember, I loved Kevin Stephenson coming out of high school.
Yeah.
I had him as a 4-star kid. I said, this kid can play. I loved his film. And he was doing it in Jacksonville. So he was playing against good competition. And I think Amorian plays against good competition too, down just outside of New Orleans. But I loved Kevin Stephenson coming out of high school. And then he was really good at the Irish Invasion camp and obviously committed at that event. But he was a guy that I had as one of the better players in that class. That his performance did not shock me at all. Amorian Walker's a completely different type of player. Kevin was like 6 foot and skinny and shifty and could stretch the field, but he was just a really dynamic athlete. Amorian is more of a vertical player. He's 6'3". He's more of a vertical speed guy. He's not a guy that's going to be doing some of the shifty things that Kevin could do. You're not going to run in the reverse really to Amorian like you did with Kevin against USC in 2017, that kind of thing. But, if his speed is as good as advertised, then I think he brings some of that vertical stretch ability that Kevin had. But if you're asking me about film, it's not even close. Because I don't like Amorian's film so far. I'm again injured as a junior, didn't play a ton. Sophomore film's not impressive. Don't really care. Don't really evaluate. So I don't like evaluating sophomore film. It just so many kids have gone from mediocre sophomores to great players because bodies grow differently. I'm looking forward to seeing the senior film, and I hope he blows up. I really do. It's just right now his film's not overly impressive. And here's the thing you got to understand: Alabama, LSU, and Michigan are not offering Amorian Walker based on his film.
Right.
They're offering based on what he's doing at camps.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the thing is, and I'm not seeing that, and I don't really make decisions on that from a ranking standpoint, an evaluation standpoint. I need to see him do it on film. Now, it's great that he's doing that at these camps. It tells me, okay, well, he was reporting a 4.56 when he committed Notre Dame. Now he's running 4.41s. That's great. I'm excited to see his film, but film-wise, Kevin Stephenson was way better.
I need that workout program.
Seriously. Well, I think it's just being healthy is the big thing. I guess he was having some leg injuries and stuff like that, but hopefully he's as good as advertised, and hopefully the Notre Dame staff was right about him. I think I might have just lost some questions here. We got a super chat down here from Patrick. Once again, another great indie podcast from you guys. Listen to while I'm at work. Thank you. So we're not all the way kicked out yet. Okay, good. Who are the DBs currently on the board? At cornerback, it is Devin Moore, Benjamin Morrison, and Jaden Bellamy. Jaden Bellamy is also a swing guy that could play corner or safety. At safety, the board is essentially Xavier Nwankpa and Jake Pope. That's basically the board at this point in time, since they canceled the visit with KJ Winston. So you have 2 corners, you have 2 safeties, and you have a swing guy in Jaden Bellamy. That's the board. And Notre Dame needs to get at least 3 of those guys. Ideally 4 would be the scenario, because I think if you get the 2 corners, Morrison and Moore, you've got to then – and you get Bellamy, you don't really have anyone that's definitely a safety.
Yeah.
So I feel like you got to get 2 of those 3 corners, and then you need to get one of Pope or Nwankpa. And if you really want to hit a home run, you need to get Pope and Nwankpa plus the 2 corners, Moore and Morrison. That's the ideal class.
Let me take any combination of those 2 cornerbacks and those 2 safeties. If you could only take one duo in the class, which duo would it be? The 2 safeties or the 2 cornerbacks?
Probably go with the 2 safeties.
I will probably lean that way.
Because I think that if you get the 2 corners, you're okay because you've got some other corners that you can move to safety.
Yeah.
But Xavier Nwankpa is
stud,
the best player of the group. And I love Devin Moore and Benjamin Morrison. You know that. I think Benjamin Morrison is one of the most underrated corners in the country. They have to close on him, man. They have to close on him. But Xavier Nwankpa is a top 50 recruit.
Yes.
And in a position where once he shows up, they won't have any top 50 recruits left on campus. And then even if Houston comes back, he'll be gone by the kid's sophomore year.
Right.
I think that's the bigger need, in my opinion. So if I can only have the 2 corners of the 2 safeties, I'd take the 2 corners. Plus, Jake Pope's one of those kids that brings you a little bit of, if you strike out a receiver, he's a kid to go play some receiver.
Yeah.
And so that's why I would take the safeties. Plus, I think Jake Pope can he can play some nickel. I think he could do a lot of different things in this defense. And again, here's the deal. The ultimate path to winning championships it's good. You have to have depth of talent, right? That, like in 2012, Notre Dame's 3 or 4 or 5 best players were as good as anybody that Alabama had. When you talk about Stephon Tuitt, you talk about Tyler Eifert, Zach Martin, Lewis Nix, Manti Te'o. I mean, that 5 was as good as anybody Bama had. The difference is from like 8 to 20 was a huge Bama gap.
Right.
You know what I mean? And now Notre Dame's getting a lot better at that 8 to 20, but they're not quite as good at the top 5 at some spots. And, you look at the current roster, they're good. They've got Mayer, they've got Kyle Hamilton, they've got those guys. But when Kyle leaves, you could have some really good players, but who's the stud?
Who's the stud?
And so that Xavier steps into that role. So you need those guys. I mean, you can't just have a class of a bunch of 100 to 250 guys. You're going to be really good. Yeah. But at some point in time, you need to have those guys that have the top 50 ceilings. And it doesn't have to be a top 50 recruit per se, but it has to be a guy that has that kind of ceiling. That's the key. That's what they're going to need. We got a super chat down here from Brandon. Brandon says, just joined, still at work, but I got one important question and answers. Brian, are you feeling nervous or uneasy about Schrouth committing to Notre Dame? I haven't heard anything specifically about that, about him not getting there, other than what's being, I guess there was a Wisconsin reporter that did a crystal ball or something. I think Tom Loy reported there's some nervousness there. I haven't gotten any of that from my sources, but I also trust Tom. And if he's saying that, then yeah, that's reason to be nervous. So the nervousness for me comes from the fact of this was supposed to be done already. That's my concern. The whole plan all along was he was going to visit Notre Dame, and then that was it. And he was going to wait to visit, and then it's going to be all good. So the fact that it's not, and there's people at Wisconsin feeling really good about this one, that's concern.
You know what? Can I give you the flip side to that? In the NBA, they say every team makes a run, right? So you're up 15, you expect the run to come, right? They might cut it to 4 or 5. There's no need to be nervous as a fan. You expect it, get yourself together, call a timeout, come back out, stretch the lead back out. And I believe that's really the mindset that Notre Dame has to have. Like, if I'm the Notre Dame staff with all 3 of the Wisconsin kids, I expect Wisconsin to make a push at some point. Like, I expect it. Like, okay, I knew this was coming. I knew this little momentum was coming. I knew this shift was coming. Now let's absorb it and let's go back to work. And let's reiterate to these 3 kids why they loved us initially. Like, look, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. And if you want to go ahead and take your visits, that's fine. You've already been up there. You lived up there. You come see our campus, and then you come watch us bang on their defense when we play. And you'll see this is the place to be. Oh, by the way, have you seen their resume for, offensive linemen in the pros over the last 5 years? Here's ours. So, who's trending in the right direction? Who's trending in that direction? I mean, I just think, and it goes back to what you said. I totally agree with you feeling like it should have never gotten to this point.
Right.
But we're talking about the long legacy of Wisconsin offensive linemen and 3 kids growing up seeing that their entire life and being in state and the pressure by family and friends to look at the in-state university. Maybe not for Schrouth, but definitely for the other 2. I expect that push. Yeah. I expect that push from Wisconsin. So it doesn't scare me. Yeah, Brandon, it doesn't scare me. It doesn't worry me. This is show and prove. Brian, this is when we find out what Quinn is really all about. No question. Right? No question. This is the adversity that pops up that shows you who you have in that O-line room leading the way. Yeah.
Just got a text that Tom Loy is reporting at 247 that Xavier Bradshaw is now not coming into Notre Dame this weekend. Notre Dame's choice. So they are not going to be recruiting him moving forward.
So now do we take that? How do we take that?
We take that as they're going to recruit a bunch of power forwards at wide receiver.
There you go.
So they're not what that tells me, and again, this is an emotional reaction, right? I mean, just based, and not emotional, but like this is just, I mean, I don't know how else to take this. when you look at the receivers they've recruited since Tommy Rees took over as offensive coordinator, it's Deion Colzie, it's Jaden Thomas, it's Maureen Walker, it's Tobias Merriweather, and I love Tobias Merriweather, right? Yeah. It's CJ Williams, it's Nicholas Anderson, and it's who's the other kid? The kid from Canada. It's a bunch of big kids that do the same thing. Yeah. Now, some of them do the same thing better than others, but what's the diverse skill set there? Can somebody explain that to me? Somebody that thinks that Notre Dame's receiver recruiting is perfectly fine and what Notre Dame's been doing at receiver is just the way to go. Can somebody explain to me why with Will Fuller on your roster with, because again, the 2015 team had smaller, faster guys, but same thing. There was no diversity on that receiving staff. They were all the same guy. They were all fast. Then you went and you did a complete opposite, and there was all big guys. Look, you scored 3 points with Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool. You scored 14 points this year with Javon McKinley and what's his name, Ben Skoranek. You scored 17 points against Georgia in 2019 with Chase Claypool and Cole Kmet as your top two receivers. You scored 14 points against Michigan with those guys. So the big boy football is not working when you play anybody that's good. I mean, does anyone want to prove me wrong? Anyone say that I'm wrong on that?
Well, I just want to say this and add on to what you've already said. I think it shows one or two things. I think it gives me a trepidation about the step forward we thought that this offense was going to make based upon what has been said.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to take a step forward, you have to do it by diversifying, especially at that position.
And it's not about size.
No.
I mean, LSU had 3 big guys, but they all played the game completely different ways.
Yes. Absolutely. One was a slasher.
Yeah.
One was like a big man that could post up, and the other one could do everything.
Right. So, that's right.
When you have that helps out everybody else.
And Alabama had smaller guys this year, but they were different.
Yeah.
Jalen Waddle's the explosive playmaker. Devontae's the smooth route runner. He's Marvin Harrison basically.
Yeah.
And Jalen Waddle's their version of Will Fuller, and then John Mechie's basically a running back. Yeah. Essentially the way he plays. Big strong kid. So again, it's not about size, it's about how they play the game. What's the diverse skill set in that group? Let's say Notre Dame gets Tobias Merriweather, CJ Williams, Maureen Walker, and Nicholas Anderson. It's a pretty good group, right? I mean, from just a pure ranking standpoint, that looks great. What's the diverse skill set there? Especially for a school that does so well at tight end. You already have big guys that can make plays. They're called tight ends.
Yeah. And for people that might think, look, it's not about just speed. That's not
right.
It's not about whether or not they can stretch the field.
Right.
It is about having guys that can run an end around. Another guy that can catch a 5-yard slant and take it 60, 70 yards. If you're getting the same guys, you're basically shutting down a certain percentage of your offense and taking away a certain part of your playbook.
You're putting more pressure on your quarterback as well.
Absolutely. And you're not attacking the full width of the field.
Right. Which means teams can better defend your run game. And then if you play teams like Clemson who actually have big corners, big talented, highly, corners that are just as good as your big receivers, you're going to be in trouble. So again, it's not about size. It's about, look, you need a diverse skill set. That's what you look at Ohio State. Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are very similar in body type. They play the game differently.
Yeah.
They play the game differently.
Yeah.
And so that's it just tells me that offensively their thought is, well, we're doing the right things. We just need to get better players doing it. And that's exactly what Brian Kelly's mentality has been for years. It's
from a strategic standpoint.
It's disappointing because I thought Tommy Rees would be different. And that's, I guess, the disappointment for me. It's not that they're not good players. Let me say something. It's not that they're not good players. No. I think Tobias Merriweather is a top 50 recruit. I think CJ Williams is a very good recruit. Nicholas Anderson does some good things. The A.M. Menor kids does some good things. But the thing is, it's not just about rankings. It's about building your depth chart the same way. If all Notre Dame had was big physical corners that were all ranked as top 100 recruits, would any of us sit there and say, yeah, that's the way to build your – no, you'd say, okay, well, what about when you play a team like Alabama or Ohio State and those big guys can't run with those guys? What happens then?
Yeah.
Well, okay, you probably should have recruited a little bit more diversity receiver. It's not about size because there's 6'2" guys that can turn and run. It's more about you have to have a unique skill set. If you recruit the 4 best defensive tackles in the country but no defensive ends, you're not going to have a defensive line that's capable of beating Alabama.
Yeah.
You're going to have a defensive line that's capable of beating 10 of the teams on your schedule, but Notre Dame's already doing that. What are you doing to take that next step?
Yeah.
Say, well, Tobias Merriweather was a great player. I agree. I think Tobias Merriweather could be every bit as good as Chase Claypool. But what happened when you had a great tight end and a great big receiver against Georgia?
Yeah.
What happened against Michigan? It is what it is.
I just think if you look at Clemson, Alabama, and also Ohio State, right? And look at their offenses. Take the Notre Dame game. We've talked about it. The adjustment they made to say,
right.
You know what? We just want to get our athletes in space against Notre Dame. We're not about to make this difficult. We're just about to get our athletes in space, and that's what they did. Swing passes, short passes, run after the catch, right? Because when they were trying to go play action and set up, stretching the field, what happened?
Right.
Kyle Hamilton almost picked the ball off twice. So they said, you know what? We're going to go away from this kid and just use our athletes. I'll take it even back to the 2 championship games between Clemson and Alabama. It was Mike Williams missed the first game. That's the big receiver, big-time receiver in the NFL. Best receiver on Clemson, suspended the first time they played, came through and had a big-time game the second time. But you know who made clutch plays in both games? That was probably the most difficult matchup for Alabama? Hunter Renfrow.
Right. He also had 4 catches for 62 yards in the playoff game against Notre Dame.
Yes.
And look what Amari Rodgers did against Notre Dame this year.
Yes.
Right. And that's the thing here's the thing. So Justin Ross and T. Higgins are both big players.
Yeah.
They're both big guys.
Yeah.
But again, they played the game differently. T. Higgins was a smooth route runner type of guy. Justin Ross was an explosive player as a freshman that year. He was a different kind of cat. You look at but you look at what Hunter Renfrow added to that mix. You look at Amari Rodgers. I mean, he had a really nice big catch against Alabama in that title game. You had a diverse skill set. Yeah. That's the whole point. It's not about you need more guys that are under 6'4". I don't care about being 6'4". I don't care if you have 3 guys that are 6 foot. You just need a diverse skill set.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Notre Dame's not getting. You say, well, they're going to have a running back. That's gone after Kyron Williams leaves.
Right.
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 So anyway,
you talked about it. I'm sorry. One more thing. You go look at what Alabama was able to do defensively in 2019 or 2020. I'm sorry, 2019-20 season, shutting everybody down, and all of a sudden, those 3 receivers, those 3 diverse receivers, walk in to Bryant-Denny Stadium on a fall afternoon and rip that defense and Nick Saban to shreds, right? Because I don't care how many 5 stars you have on that defense. When you have a diverse attack with that quarterback,
right,
and Clyde Edwards-Helaire coming out the backfield in the run game and the passing game, I don't care how many 5 stars you have on defense. You can't stop that.
Right.
You can't stop it. And Notre Dame just, I don't know, maybe he's used to throwing to those type of receivers in his time as a quarterback. So maybe that's what he thinks is going to work. Hey, there's not too many Megatrons in college football.
Yeah. And how many rings does Megatron have, right? I mean, it's not about just one guy. It's about a whole group of guys.
Yeah.
On a better note, Jeffrey Rohrabacher says, Sean, looking good in the hat.
Thank you.
I would agree
I
with
love
that.
it.
I would agree with that. Andrew Freer says, any updates on CJ Williams? Haven't heard a lot about his recruitment, and I know he's visiting soon. He's visiting this weekend, and he's been to Texas. He's been to, I think he did an unofficial to USC. I think he's done an unofficial to Stanford, and I'm trying to remember. He was at Texas most recently. I'm trying to remember where. I think he's going to also visit Bama. I'm not sure. CJ has talked about extending his recruitment into the fall. If you're Notre Dame, if he's a guy you want, for all I know, they don't like him as much as Nicholas Anderson and the other kid. I mean, I'm honestly at this point in time, I'm glad that they like Tobias Merriweather. That's great because he's the best receiver on the board. So at least they have that going for him. After that, I have no clue what they think at receiver. None. Because it just doesn't make any sense.
Which position do you think is going to be impacted the most? Or shall I say, because I think wide receiver might be one of those positions that once kids are able to play again and you start to see more tape, I think you're gonna have a lot more wide receivers jumping out on tape to programs. But I was just wondering, is there another position where you feel like, from a development standpoint, if you didn't see tape on these kids at this position, once they get to play again, this is the position to watch? Or
I think offensive line.
Okay.
Because I think what happened is a lot of kids who have had big growth spurts in the last couple of years didn't get a chance to really show that in the fall in some of these states, especially the Midwestern states, you know, where like Wisconsin had spring ball, Illinois had spring ball, but they didn't have many games. They played, what, 3 or 4 games in Illinois?
4 games,
right? So I think that would be kind of a position that I would say some kids are going to break out. And a lot of kids weren't able to visit camps. You know, a lot of these schools were focused on, 2023 camps. They weren't able to get a lot of these, 2022 kids on campus, but like Notre Dame finding Ashton Craig, right? Like, I think there's going to be a lot more kids like that kind of come out of the woodwork this year. Just my prediction. I could be wrong on that, but it'd be my prediction. But I mean, Andrew, there's just not a lot to report on them. I think Notre Dame's in a good place, but until they get them on campus and they have the visit, it's going to be hard to know just how much they're able to sit in. Look, we've seen that a lot. I warned y'all before the visit started. There's going to be a lot of swaying with these visits. Some of it's worked out for Notre Dame. Some of it hasn't worked out for Notre Dame so far. And then, of course, Notre Dame seems to be struggling at a couple positions, but in other positions they're doing well. So we'll see how it plays out. I'm trying not to get too fired up about it today. I'm just annoyed and frustrated because things that you see, I see it every week in college football. I see it from Ohio State. I see it from Clemson. I see it from teams that are actually winning championships and competing for championships. And then Notre Dame just stubbornly won't do that. It makes no sense. Like, why a program that recruits tight ends as well as Notre Dame tight ends still feels a strange obsession to recruit more athletic versions of tight ends at receiver. It makes no sense to me. Omar Alston says, I'm hoping the OT situation is like running back last year, miss on the top of the board, but still get players we can be excited about. And that's why I say let it play out. You're right, because at the end of the day, it's like last year they missed out on some top guys, but they ended up getting Joe Alt. I like Joe Alt. I have no problem taking Joe Alt. I mean, if that's the kind of plan B guy you want, because that's the kind of plan B guy that goes to Iowa or goes to Wisconsin, and you don't ever know who he is. He's some 3-star kid from Minnesota. He goes to Minnesota. He goes to Wisconsin. He goes somewhere you never heard of, and all of a sudden, as a redshirt sophomore, he's no all Big Ten guy. We see that all the time. Who knew Tristan Wirfs was going to be what he was, right? I don't believe he was a 5-star recruit. I don't think he was a big-time recruit, right? So to me, I like those guys. I'm actually looking him up right now because I don't believe he was considered a big-time recruit coming out of high school. Yeah, an unranked 4-star from Rivals. He wasn't even the top 250.
Wow.
And he was a top 10 NFL draft pick. And again, I'm not knocking Rivals for that. It's kids develop differently.
Yep.
So I like guys like that. And look, last year's O-line class was a good O-line class. Very top-heavy. A nice project beneath that in Joe Alt, but Notre Dame should be having Joe Alt be your 4th or 5th guy, not your number 3 guy. Yeah. That's my issue. And same thing with Ashton Craig. I like Ashton Craig. I'd take Ashton Craig. If Notre Dame gets Ashton Craig, I'm good with that. But Ashton Craig should be your 4th or 5th guy, not your 3rd guy. And if they get like him and Ryan Baer, he's their 3rd guy, in my opinion. And that to me is where the problem comes from. All right, let's get down here to John A1. If we're not recruiting Bradshaw, what does that mean for the guys on the team? Lindsey, Keys, Watt? Is it more about being polished or playing style of the wide receiver for a recruit? Honestly, at this point in time, I don't have any idea. I really have no idea. And I wish I had an answer, John, and you gave us a $10 super chat for me not to have an answer. They're going to play Lindsey and they're going to play Watt. Keys. They haven't done anything to make me think there's any value that they have value in Xavier Watts. They just kind of stuck him in the boundary because they needed a guy to play boundary this spring, and he didn't really get much of a look. And I don't know what they think about Xavier Watts. I hope they give him a shot, but at this point in time, we just have to wait and see how things go in the fall. Hopefully they play him, and hopefully he steps up, and hopefully those other 2 guys get a chance to play and they step up and they show the staff that, hey, you can actually be successful at receiver with people under 6'4". It is possible, actually, in college football today. In case you weren't paying attention to the game you lost, the last 2 games you lost, where you were getting beat by a bunch of 165-pound receivers in one game and a 5'10" guy in the other game. So maybe that changes a little bit, but I don't think this recruiting has any impact on who they're going to play this year. It's more about this recruiting is more about what are we trying to build towards, and hopefully they're right. I hope I'm wrong, Sean. I hope you and I are both wrong about this because otherwise it's going to be concerning. But if they're right about this, it's about saying here's the style of play we want to have. We want to be a run the football, But that's the other thing is if you're going to play that kind of football, you got to have an elite offensive line. Yep. You can't be missing on a lot of your top guys every year.
Nope.
But anyway, before we get off on that tangent, but you look at receiver recruiting, what they're saying is we want to have bigger players that can kind of work the sidelines, right? Play action, hit the post cuts, hit the out cuts, can do some things over the middle of the field, can do things that you've seen from Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool and Javon McKinley in recent years, right? Yeah. The problem is that when you have those receivers, and look, there's two types of receivers, essentially. If you want to boil all the receivers down, there's three types. The first type is the guys that really do damage after the catch. And they may be great route runners, but they're really dynamic after the catch, okay? Yeah. That, to me, is more of a Jalen Waddle type. At Notre Dame, a Braden Lindsey type. Maury Rogers is sort of that kind of guy. Those guys that once they get the ball, they're dangerous. Yeah. Then you have the guys that do their best work before the catch and to the point of the catch. Those are the big receivers. That's a Chase Claypool. That's a Miles Boykin. That's a Michael Floyd, right? Whereas Golden Tate would be the after the catch guy, right? Now, then there's the unicorns, and those are the guys that do it all. But they're rare, and they're top 10 picks, and there aren't many of those guys out there. And so really your roster is going to have one of the first two. What I'm saying is I think a team needs a combination of those two types of players in your receiving core because you're not going to have a tight end who's really that kind of guy. I mean, Michael Mayer can make people miss and pick up a third down. Michael Mayer's not making people miss and then running 60 yards for a touchdown very often, right? So you need some of those receivers, especially if you're going to run screens and play actions and RPOs. What this also tells me is that the RPO thing is really not something that they view as the future of the Notre Dame offense. They may do it this year because they've got guys that can do it, but it's not necessarily something they're looking to do beyond simply RPOs that are just, the quick stuff, right? The quick outs, the quick hitches, which is fine. I mean, that stuff works. That's what they did in 2018. But it tells me that they're not necessarily looking to get guys that get them in space and be dynamic. Yeah. That's just not part of what they're doing. Now, they could end up being right on this, and hopefully they are. I don't think they are just because no one does that, right? There's no team other than Notre Dame that's trying to do that, right? Oklahoma's not trying to do that. Clemson's not trying to do that. Alabama's not trying to do that. Ohio State's not trying to do that. Notre Dame is. But the one thing Notre Dame doesn't have in common with those two teams is Notre Dame does not score when they play in big games. They just don't. Name me the time in the last 4 years that Notre Dame has played a really good team that they've scored a lot of points because of the offense. I think the only game you can really name, I'm talking about good teams, is the USC game in 2017. And they just USC, that wasn't a great USC team, but ranking-wise, they were. Clemson in 2007, this past year, you can't say Clemson because, again, they scored, 33 points in regulation? Yeah. 7 of those points came on a defensive turnover. You only scored 26 offensive points. 3 more of those points came on a forced fumble where you lost yards offensively and still got 3 points out of it. Yep. So you really only scored 23 points. That's your high water mark is 23 offensive points on offense in a big game where the opponent was missing their 3 best defensive players. So, I mean, you can get mad at me all you want. Not you, Sean, but people can get mad at me. You're negative, but prove me wrong.
We're just stating the fact.
Where am I wrong?
Yeah.
Right? All these other teams are going to the postseason and scoring points. They're scoring points. Notre Dame's not scoring points, which is why Notre Dame's an offer in these games. And the only big-time program Notre Dame has beat in these moments with these low-scoring games is LSU. They did it twice. But what did LSU do? Said, we can't keep doing this because it's not working. We're getting our butts kicked by Alabama for almost a decade. So what do? They opened up their offense. They became more explosive. They scored 49 points per game. They went out and won a championship.
You know what? Right? I wish, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Brian. I wish the football program had enough guts or as much guts as Mike Bray. And what
I got to hear this one.
Yeah, what I mean by that is we all know Notre Dame is not getting the top recruits from a basketball standpoint. But Mike Bray is definitely going to spread you out and find a way to score.
Yeah. Okay, I get you.
He's going to use his talent and find a way to maximize what he has. And he might not win, but you better believe he's going to compete. Whether they're playing a mid-level team or they're playing one of the best teams at the top of the ACC, it's going to be a competitive team. And the only reason you know that the other team is better is because down the stretch, the talent usually comes through. And Notre Dame's not able to close.
And Notre Dame shouldn't have that problem in football.
And they shouldn't have that problem.
Right.
On the flip side, Notre Dame has talent.
Right. And a defense.
And
The basketball team doesn't.
And now you have an offense and offensive structure that basically refuses to spread teams out and use their talent to the best of its ability. Or you just take the mindset, everybody else is shooting threes. We're not doing that.
Right.
We're just going to continue to bang the ball in the post, take twos, go to the free throw line, and for every two, other teams are hitting threes, and we're falling behind each and every year. And that's what you want to do. You just want to continue to ignore the evolution of the game and the skill set that players are starting to develop at a younger age. Like when I'll speak for myself. When I played in the public league as a guard, they told us drive the ball to the basket and get it to the big man. That's it. That's what you do as a point guard. There was no scoring point guard. Isaiah Thomas was an anomaly out of Chicago. It was like, oh, okay. That's it. Now, if you're playing point guard and you can't score,
you're Lonzo Ball and nobody wants you. And everybody talks about you're not good and all that.
Absolutely. Right? So now, if your offense can't attack at multiple levels, not only vertically, but the width of the field, what are you really doing? Are you really trying to be a top-notch offensive unit?
Yeah, you're trying to beat who they've been beating.
Yes.
That's what you're trying to do.
And that's playing too safe for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mason says 19 was the lighter pants for the Boston College game. Yeah, I like the lighter pants. I think those match a lot better, especially being there in person. They looked way better. And I also liked the way that because they had that mesh looking, it wasn't mesh, but they had like the style on the number was mesh.
Yeah.
I could have gone without the black black shoes, but if you could do that with more, modern colored shoes, that'd be an awesome uniform. Yeah. That was my favorite one by far.
I agree.
Justin MacArthur, those 2013 all whites were nice. I didn't dislike them. I didn't like them. I don't love all white uniforms. It's always kind of been that way. But maybe that's because I've always been kind of anti-Penn State. Yeah, I'm just not me. I'm not, I'm too messy anyway. But a lot of people like those. And a lot. And I think, I don't know, like that. Then they had like gold numbers too, like with a little green outline. Yeah. Now that part I liked. That part I liked.
And then that was like the cloth with the outline on the helmet.
Yeah. The helmet was sharp. I like the helmet. It's just most of that. The only helmet I didn't really like was the one where it was like half gold and half blue with. I didn't like that one. That was 2012, I think. I liked the result of the game. Great game, but I didn't like the helmets. Do you think Ashton Craig is basically a lock to Notre Dame since we offered him recently? I think they got to close on him. The reason I don't want to say it's a lock because then it's going to make it look like it was easy to get him. And I think that would be me misleading you in an attempt to hammer Coach Quinn. Yeah. Because there are other top programs recruiting him. It's not like he's some kid that nobody else wanted and you offered him and beat Indiana and Kentucky for him. I think there are top programs that are looking at him. I've been told that Ohio State's looking at him and there are other teams looking at him because he's hit a little bit of a growth spurt. So I think it'd be unfair for me to say it's a lock because that makes it look like, well, they just offered it and it was a no-brainer. You know what I mean? Like, I think they're going to have to recruit him. Should they get him? Yeah, they should get him. He's an in-state kid. But I've hammered Jeff Quinn enough today. I don't want to say that in a way where it's going to look like I'm taking another shot at him. You know what I mean? You've spoken objectively about things surrounding the program. That's all. Yeah. Yeah. I think you've been fair. I think you've been very fair today. I appreciate that. Yeah. Paul, thanks for the super chat, Paul. I appreciate that very much. Paul says, on a happy story, on this day in 2015, a beautiful woman intent on wooing me mailed me 2 tickets to Notre Dame, South Carolina, my first in South Bend. Obviously, I married her. Obviously. I mean, I would boot you out of the room if you didn't marry that woman after she did that for you. I mean, seriously. Like,
that's a heck of a first impression.
Yes, no question. She's trying to woo you. First of all, you were being wooed. That's check number 1 in her favor.
Right.
And then she knew you well enough to know where your heart really was, which was number 1, quality time with her, right? Right. And then number 2, the Notre Dame USC game. And that was a pretty awesome Notre Dame USC game. That was a really fun game. Remember, that was the game where USC took that opening drive right down the field and scored, Cody Kessler. And the first play from scrimmage for Notre Dame, Will Fuller just smoked Dory Jackson over the top.
Yeah.
Now that was cool, Paul, because that game actually. So this was back when they used to let us film the game from the top of the stadium, and I was able to watch the game, like the full game. You know, I could just go back and watch it. We couldn't put it on user or anything, and they don't let us do that anymore, obviously. But my wife was up there having some issues with the camera, so I was up there helping her get it settled. And I just kind of the series is about to start, so I just figure I'll just stay here and just watch the series. And then of course, when Kaiser lets that ball go, you hear this crescendo of the crowd just kind of get louder and louder and louder. And as soon as Fuller hits it, just the crowd exploded. It was awesome. And then, of course, Adori's like, I'm an Olympian. I can catch you. No, I can't. You know what I mean? So that was big time.
I mean, Will looked back at the 10-yard line and kind of coasted on him, which is probably a little embarrassing because Adori was full out sprint.
Yeah.
Thinking he was going to catch it.
Nope, didn't pan out. I lost a couple questions here just because we went down, but here's a couple. There may be a couple I missed. If I did miss your question, please just resubmit it. I'll definitely try to get to it. And again, Paul, thanks for the super chat, buddy. And congratulations on finding yourself a wonderful lady. No question about it. Sean Higgins says, curious about the bat signal going up before commit announces. Surely the staff runs that by the recruit prior to doing it. Seems it kind of takes away from the announcement itself. Yes, they do. Right. That's part of the conversation. But the other thing is, I don't know if it necessarily takes away because in a lot of these instances, we've been debated, well, who one was that was actually for?
Yeah.
Right. So the one that happened the day that Donovan Hinish and Kane Madden went up, people say, well, who's it for? Some people have been told by their sources that it was for Donovan Hinish. Other people, I was told that it was for Kane Madden. So I think I get it, but I also think they understand. I mean, look, here's the deal. If Notre Dame didn't put the bat signal up, would people still not know who it's going to, the kid is going to commit when 47 crystal balls go up for one kid to one school the day before he's going to announce, the day he's going to announce, so this is a way for Notre Dame to just kind of continue branding and just kind of something cool. And the kids like it. And, and look, if a kid said, hey, coach, I don't want that up there, they wouldn't do it. I guarantee you they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't put that up there if the kid didn't want to. But I think most kids kind of like it because it's also their thing of okay, they accepted my commitment and I'm ready to go. It's time to rock and roll. John A1 asks, how did you think Kristofic and Carell performed in the spring game? How would you compare them to to the last you saw of Madden? Well, number one, Madden's a more experienced player. So fundamentally, he's going to be sounder. He's stronger than both of those guys and all those kind of things. Those two guys are far more athletic than he is. They're far less fundamentally sound than he is. And I think that's part of the reason that Notre Dame is looking at Kane Madden is because you at least know what you're going to get from Kane Madden. He's going to be fundamentally sound. He's going to be assignment sound and those kind of things. But other than that, I mean, Sean, did you watch much of those guys in the spring game? I mean, I thought they did okay. The whole line as a whole just was not good, but I thought they had
for me that just overall I wasn't impressed with the offensive line, but I don't put too much into a spring game.
Remember how bad Deshaun Kaiser looked? Remember when he got outplayed by Montgomery Van Gorder?
Yeah.
Like
you said, Nate Montana's been the MVP of the spring game.
Junior Jabby, baby.
Junior Jabby. So no, I don't invest too much in the spring game.
Preston says, how many offensive linemen is Notre Dame looking to take, and does the number change if they strike out their top targets? I think they need 4 is the minimum. I think they can get up to 5, but 4 is the number that they need because they're still trying. Because here's the deal. If you only get 3 in this class, that means in a 3-year period, you've recruited, 10 offensive linemen. So in 3 years, you barely have enough for a 2 deep, right? And if anybody gets hurt or something like that, you don't have a 2 deep. Okay, so you need, to me, an average of 12 over every 3-year period. That's where you need to be, in my opinion. Sean, you're going to be getting out of here soon. So let's see if we can get some questions here.
Okay.
That you would like to answer. A lot of questions about, here we go. Mike Gardner says, to me, Freeman is proving that top tier talent can be recruited to Notre Dame, even late. If you are Kelly, how do you see this and keep coaches on staff that can't replicate that effort? I'm going to let you handle that one, Sean.
Brian, you've coached, you've worked on a staff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure
but not D1, so it doesn't count.
Not D1.
So it doesn't count.
No, it counts. Because what you're dealing with personalities, and you're dealing with people that have different strengths and weaknesses, right? So it's not so much, I think you just pointed out how they got Logan Diggs, right? It wasn't necessarily Lance Taylor, but it was someone that was familiar with that area, that had built up a rapport, that was able to help facilitate him joining the class.
Right.
And that's how you do it. It's not just, okay, this is your region. If I know a coach in that region and we have a personal relationship, we have a good rapport, or I know the family of a player in that region, then come help me. Come help me recruit this kid. That's why it's called a staff.
Or, hey, you know what? How about you take this one over, because the familial relationship is going to be a lot more important to him than the position coach part of it, potentially.
So on each staff, it's very rare. Everybody can't be a superstar recruiter. I don't care what staff you go to. I don't care. You know who the best recruiter for Alabama is? Nick Saban. Yeah. I'm going somewhere here. You know who the best recruiter for Clemson is? Dabo Swinney.
Lincoln Riley, Ryan Day. You can continue that trend.
So you see where I'm going with this?
Right.
That's what needs to happen. No one on the staff should be better at recruiting than Brian Kelly.
Right. And definitely not better than at closing.
At closing.
Yes.
No, nobody. Yes. Marcus Freeman, we love what he's brought. We love the intensity. We love the high expectations and how he's raised the expectations for recruiting. But hey, if you're Brian Kelly, you have to become a closer.
Mm-hmm.
Shaq is no longer on your team, right? It's your team now, right? Go close. Go be that Kobe,
right?
For us and for the program.
For me, Sean, I don't think every coach has to be a great recruiter, because it's just not needed. Every coach has to, but if you're not going to be a great recruiter, you better be a really good coach. My issue is I think there are some positions where you have to have good recruiters on your staff. You have to have a good recruiter at running backs coach. It's just, you have to. If you don't have and it doesn't have to be recruiting running backs. It could be someone who can recruit everywhere. If you don't have a good because it's the easiest position to coach. So having an elite coach doesn't matter to me if he can't recruit. If I have an elite offensive line coach, it's not someone who loves – Harry Hiestand did not like recruiting. He didn't necessarily recruit a lot of players, but he was a great coach, and he had a great reputation, and he could say, I want you, I want you, I want you, and I want you.
Yep.
And they would come more often than not. You know what I mean? But so I wouldn't call him necessarily a great recruiter, but the product spoke for itself, and he got the job done.
Right.
You can't have a receivers coach who isn't a good recruiter. You can't have a DB coach who isn't a great recruiter.
No.
You can't have a D-line coach who isn't a great recruiter.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a great recruiter at linebacker.
Yeah.
Linebackers are different. The D coordinator they'll connect with or whatever, or the regional guy.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a great recruiter at really quarterback even, because that's where the head coach can come into play, right?
There you go.
Or the offensive coordinator in instances. Now, Notre Dame's situation is unique because their quarterback's coach is their offensive coordinator. You don't need a great recruiter at tight end. I mean, at Notre Dame, that sort of sells itself.
Yeah.
Just don't be a waste of space. But I'd rather have a guy that's a great coach. But I think you can't have as many not great recruiters as Notre Dame has on one side of the ball.
Absolutely.
That's my bigger concern.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because they've had some bad offensive recruiting coaches, but those coaches are always balanced by guys who are really good. When they had Charlie Molnar and Tim Hinton, who weren't really good recruiters, they had Mike Denbrock and Tony Alford. And then there was a period of time where you had Denbrock, Alford, and Harry Hiestand all in the same staff. And look at some of the offensive talent Notre Dame brought in for those few years that they were together. So, that was the talent that led to the 2015 team that had all that offensive talent. So I think that's my concern. And to his point, I think guys like Chip Long did this too. Mike Denbrock did this. Harry Hiestand did this. And now Marcus Freeman's doing this, is that it shows that, hey, look, you can go around the country and get the best players. You can battle for those guys. I mean, his success rate at linebacker in this class is just going to be stupid good.
Yeah.
As far as who he targeted that were top players and who he got.
Yeah.
He's going to get 3 top 100 linebackers that Notre Dame had no shot at getting the day that he was hired.
Yep.
And that to me is like, wow. So why isn't that happening at other positions? Well, it's because at some of those positions, you don't have really dynamic recruiters. Some of the positions you're just not going to look. Marcus Freeman's not coming in and all of a sudden they're getting 3 top 50 corners, right? So there are some positions where just right now Notre Dame's going to have to go prove something on the field before they're able to get those guys. And even then, they're not necessarily going to get those guys all the time.
Yeah,
you give me a couple Benjamin Morrisons and Devin Moores and Ryan Barneses every year. I'm good. I'm good with that.
Yeah,
coach them up. So that's kind of where I'm at. Is that's been my issue with Kelly. Is he's left guys like Autry Denson on the staff too long. He makes too many excuses for certain people that aren't getting the job done on the recruiting trail. Yeah. And that is problematic. It really is.
And it's a replicate effort. Are we talking about outcome?
Right.
Or are we talking about just flat out not putting in the work?
Right. And that's something I would never, ever question Jeff Quinn about.
Right.
I would never, ever question Jeff Quinn's work ethic,
right?
His character. I think he's a good dude. But the outcome, because look, 2020, great year. I mean, really, really, really good year on the offensive line coaching. Brought in a couple studs in recruiting, right? Those are positives.
Yeah.
But if you need to look at the bigger picture. What did he do the first couple years? Brian Kelly's even admitted the offensive line play wasn't good enough. Jeff Quinn's first 2 years. It was good the third year. Well, if it takes a step back, it's going to take a step back.
Right.
I don't care if Harry Hiestand was here. It's going to take a step back because you don't lose 4 NFL caliber players. And if Tommy Kramer wasn't injured and didn't have all the injuries, he would have been drafted it. And he's still in an NFL camp. So you lost 4 NFL players, 4 3-year starters. You're not going to be as good. The question is how big of a drop off is it?
Yeah.
If you go back to looking like you did in 18 and 19, that's a problem. Now you're going to say 3 of your 4 years you weren't a top 10 top 5 to 10 offensive line. That's problematic at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Even in the year that Notre Dame had a bad year under Harry Hiestand, 2016, they had 2 All-Americans on the offensive line. You know what I mean? Like, so, and then if you combine that with an underwhelming recruiting class, you do need to be able to question that. But here's the problem, and here's where it almost becomes useless to talk about. It doesn't matter. I hope that Jeff Quinn proves me wrong, because the reality is he's not going anywhere.
No.
He's going to be here as long as he wants to be here.
Yeah.
Because as long as Brian Kelly's here, there's no way that Brian Kelly's getting rid of Jeff Quinn. No way. So we can talk about it and criticize him all we want and all that, and we will, but he's not going anywhere. So when you talk about that keeping coaches, Mike, he's not going anywhere. I mean, Sean, you and I agree that that's one coach that's not going anywhere.
And I just want him to make plays. I mean, not make plays, but make improvements.
Right.
Just make improvements. If we see improvements in the recruiting and in the coaching, everything will be fine. We want you to stay. We don't want anybody to lose a job.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we sit here and we talk about the facts and we talk about what we see. We're not saying this guy needs to go. We're saying somebody needs to either light a fire under this guy, or
and ultimately that's what it needs to be. It needs to be a staff sitting down to say, "Hey, look, this has to change."
Yes.
But then also, if Brian Kelly says, "Hey, he's here, he's staying, he's done," and Coach Kelly's convinced himself he's one of the best offensive line coaches in the country, which he has done, then when you're Tommy Rees, you need to say, "Okay, well then I need help at other places. I need to get some better recruiters here," and then Tommy Rees can help with some of the offensive lines. Because I'll tell you right now, the conversations Tommy Rees had with Carson Hinsman when he was on campus were very impressive for Carson Hinsman and his family. And I think he's kind of got that personality, Sean. You know Tommy Rees a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what he can do. So you can overcome that if the product on the field is good enough. But you have to know who your weaknesses are, and you have to know that, okay, as a staff, here's how we're going to overcome that.
That's where
you got to come up with a plan.
As a staff.
Yeah.
You guys have to be pulling the same rope in the same direction all together.
Right.
And the communication has to be top notch.
Right.
There has to be trust. There has to be honesty. All of that stuff that goes into the makeup of a great relationship. It's the same thing with a staff.
Because other head coaches who have coaches, they're like, look, I have this guy on staff because he's a great coach.
Yeah.
I know he doesn't like recruiting. He's not good at recruiting. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to handle the recruiting part of it.
Right.
You just keep coaching up all Americans.
Yeah.
I can live with that. You know, that's okay. I can dig that. So, Sean, do you got to go or do you got time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, I got time for one more, and then I have to get out of here.
All right, let's see if we can find something that's not related to the offensive deal here. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. Nolan Esparza. I remember people complaining about Harry Hiestand when he was at Notre Dame. I sure do miss Harry these days. I'm not a Quinn hater, but the difference is significant. And that is true. There was a pocket of people that always complained about Harry Hiestand, and I'll never understand that. I just think because his name wasn't Joe Moore. I mean, I think that's what it boils down to. It didn't matter how good the offensive lines were. I know of one particular website that just used to always hammer the offensive lines when Harry Hiestand was here. And it was just like, what?
But Joe Moore wasn't perfect.
Right, exactly.
Harry Hiestand isn't perfect.
Right.
Jeff Quinn isn't going to be perfect.
Right.
And his predecessor won't be perfect. Look, you can find a flaw in any coach, right, on any staff. But the outcome or the output that we saw from Harry Hiestand and the offensive line under his tutelage on the college level and the next level, you can't argue with that. You just can't.
And that's why this is such a big year for Jeff Quinn. If Notre Dame is right about Kane Madden and Jeff Quinn is able to get this offensive line to play at a high level to where they don't have to win the Joe Moore Award or even be a finalist, but where they're still pretty good. And then Jarrett Patterson goes out and he's a first-round pick next year. Now, all of a sudden, you've put 2 really good years back-to-back. You're putting guys in the NFL. Yeah. That's how Jeff Quinn gets this thing going. Because, again, Harry just kind of picked who he wanted, and they came. Of course, I'm going to play for Harry Hiestand. I could tell you some funny stories about conversations I've had with Notre Dame recruits that picked Notre Dame and the conversation I had with Harry Hiestand. They weren't long conversations.
Yeah.
It was, this Coach Hiestand, I want you to come play for me. I'm going to make you a first-round pick. I'm going to make you an All-American. What do you say? Okay. You know, I mean, that's really kind of what it was. It wasn't like these 30 conversations to get to know him. It just was like, that's Harry Hiestand, man, you know, but the product spoke for itself.
Yeah.
And that's why this year is so important for Coach Quinn. If Coach Quinn can do the job coaching this team up and get this offensive line to play at a high level, this team's going to be really good. And all of a sudden, some of the negative recruiting that's working against him right now, because let's be honest, you know, this year kind of did hurt him a little bit because you had this great offensive line. You didn't play well at the end, but how come none of those guys were first-round picks?
Right.
I mean, that's what you've been touting all these years is every left tackle is a first-round pick till now. You know, I mean, people are going to use that against him. I still say there aren't a lot of teams that can put 2 guys in the second round and 1 in the third from the same lineup in one class. That's still pretty good.
Yeah.
But that's just the negative recruiting. He ain't Harry. That's the negative recruiting that's going to happen. If Jeff Quinn puts another good product on the field in 2021 on the offensive line, then all of a sudden he can walk around with a little bit more of a hey, you know what? This cat's keeping that tradition going. You know, and now it's even more important because this year he won't have any Hiestand recruits there.
No.
You can't say, well, it was the Harry Hiestand effect, like you could say in 2020, because you had Chris Watt, you know, these former Harry Hiestand players. If they put a good product on the field, a top 7 to 8 offensive line on the field this year, it's a Jeff Quinn group, 100%.
Yep.
And that's going to help him on a recruiting trail a big way. I mean, it's important that he does that. And that's where a lot of this stuff gets silenced. I think that's where a lot of these fears get alleviated if he can put a great product on the field this year. That'll be a big part of it. So, Sean, thank you for being with us, man. I will get you back on here again very, very soon.
I mean, hopefully see you guys next week. Go right there, irishbreakdown.com.
I think Wednesday is when we're shooting for the round table for next week. So, we're going to have next week we do have topics picked out, but we'll have a really interesting one on Wednesday. So
irishbreakdown.com. Go get your apparel. I just got that gap closers. So I'm waiting for it to come in the mail. I'll be nice. You all have a great day.
Thanks, Sean.
All right.
All right, so Brandon has a super chat. Brandon, again, I appreciate it very much, man. I appreciate you being here. Do you think Craig has the potential to play tackle at an elite level, Or does he project more as a guard with O-line recruiting uneasy? Would love Notre Dame to be able to find or find an undiscovered elite or high-ceiling offensive lineman. So a couple things about this one, Brandon. Notre Dame is recruiting him to play on the inside. They're recruiting him to be a center guard guy, is what I was told last night by his head coach. So they're recruiting him to be an inside guy. I have to see him fill out first before I can really love that one. I think the athleticism is there. He's got a nice punch. I kind of like them better on the edge because I feel like on the edge you can sort of mask that a little bit more than you can on the inside. But if Matt Balis gave them the thumbs up on this, then that tells me Matt Balis thinks this kid can put on the body weight that you need to thrive. And there's no reason – if Matt Balis signs off on him, that means Matt Balis thinks he can be a Jarrett Patterson type of body type. I think he's a little bit longer than Jarrett. I think he's a little bit more athletic than Jarrett was. He's just not quite as big as Jarrett was coming out of high school. So I think he could play tackle. Can he play it at an elite level? I don't think that, but I don't think he has to play it at an elite level. You don't need all five guys to be elite. I think that Ashton Craig, if you can tell, and I'll say, I've said this before, if Notre Dame, I think Notre Dame should be taking on average 4 linemen a year. I think that should always be the target. Bring in 4 linemen a year. Occasionally you're going to do 3, and then you balance that out with 5, but you should never do 2. You should be at 4 a year is where I think the sweet spot should be for Notre Dame. If every year you told me that 4th guy was going to be a Joe Alt or an Ashton Craig, I'm happy. No complaints for me. I like those kind of guys because offensive line is a unique position because that is a position where you see the recruiting analysts miss most, in my opinion, that and quarterback. And a big reason for that is because so many of these kids that end up being great linemen, they don't really fill out till they get older. Some of them don't really get, they'll get big real fast, and it takes a while to get their hand-eye coordination going, their footwork, their agility. It's kind of, they go through that awkward phase that a 6-foot guy doesn't go through as a teenager. So I think those are the things where you can see offensive line as a position where you see a lot of 2-3-star kids end up being first-round NFL draft picks. So I don't mind taking guys like that. I don't mind taking guys like Joe Alt. I actually like taking guys like Joe Alt. I like taking guys like Ashton Craig. The problem is they got to be your number 4. So let's say they get Ashton Craig and they get a Joe Bruner. That's a good save. If they get a Carson Hinsman, a Billy Schrouth with Ashton Craig, that's a good class. It's not a great class because you don't have any elite players in there. Notre Dame should always get at least one elite player or at least an elite upside guy. And I don't know if any of the guys in this class are that. We got to see what Ty Chan does on the field this year. But that's what I would say is, I like getting those kind of guys. And like you said, love to Notre Dame be able to find an undiscovered elite or high ceiling offensive tackle. I'd put him in the high ceiling category, Brandon. I wouldn't put him in the elite category, but I don't put many guys in the elite category. And I don't think he has to be that. Like, I think Robert Hainsey was an excellent player for Notre Dame. Would I call him elite? No, because elite to me is Quentin Nelson. It's even Liam Eichenberg this year. It's that first round pick, first team All-American kind of guy. I think Robert Hainsey was overlooked. I think Robert Hainsey should have been like a 3rd team All-American this year. I think he was very, very much underrated. But would you say he was an elite guy? I don't think so because I don't put a lot of guys in that category. But I don't think you need to do that. If you have 5 really good offensive linemen and none of them are elite, you're going to have a great offensive line. A great offensive line. Better than an offensive line that's got 2 elite guys, a couple solid guys, and a guy that's not very good. You give me 5 really good offensive linemen that play together, you're going to have a great offensive line. You're going to win a lot of football games that way. So I don't think you necessarily need the elite guy if you're getting a lot of really good guys. And that's what I'm saying is let's see how this class fills out. I don't see them getting any elite guys, but that could end up being okay. They got a couple of them last year, right? So it just needs the depth of talent. You just can't have 2 really good ones and then a big drop off. That's what you can't have. Preston says, do you think Notre Dame would make a push for a guy like George Fitzpatrick? They've already backed off him, so that one's not gonna happen. See, Skylar Hill, hey guys, enjoy the show. Keep it up. I guess I know nothing about college football. There's a lot of love for Wisconsin. Am I missing something? Skylar, we've been having that conversation here for a little bit. I don't get it. I think that if I had to say where do I think it comes from, I think number 1, it's reputation. Wisconsin's been a good program for a while. It's just fine. But I don't understand why Notre Dame's not getting that same benefit of the doubt for what they've done the last 4 years. Number 2, I think there's a lot of confidence that Wisconsin brings back a ton of players. especially on defense. And when Wisconsin has had an experience in the past, they've been really good. They're a team that's as good about anybody as a coaching staff. They're as good as anybody when it comes to if you got a really experienced team, they're going to get the most out of that team. And I think that's what it boils down to. And I think the fact that the game is away from Notre Dame Stadium is another reason why maybe people are thinking that's going to be a tougher game for Notre Dame. I think I'd be a lot more nervous about this game if it was at Camp Randall, but it's not. It's in Chicago. So I don't get it. I mean, I think they're going to be a good team. I think they're going to be top 20 to 25 team for sure. I just don't get the top 10 to 12 love that a lot of people are giving them, and I definitely don't understand why they're considered a favorite on a neutral field over Notre Dame. Jonathan asks, any chance that Notre Dame chooses Blake Fisher or Zach Rice's visit chaperone just to give Fisher the chance to forge that partnership? I'd be shocked if that doesn't happen. They're already communicating publicly on Twitter. I'd be shocked if Blake Fisher isn't around Zach Rice this entire weekend. Matt D, I've missed Harry since he took the Bears job. I was concerned about where we are O-line-wise for a couple years now. I agreed. So what we have to figure out and what 2021 is going to tell us, Matt, was 2020 an anomaly or was it a trend? The anomaly is you have that one great team, that one great group, and then the next year you kind of go back to what you were before. We've seen that. We've seen that with teams. We've seen that with groups. We've seen that with players. And like everything was working in Notre Dame's favor last year. Didn't play a lot of great defenses. The one team they played in the regular season that had a good defense, they were banged up when Notre Dame played them. You had a lot of veterans, a lot of experience, a lot of talent that you didn't necessarily have to coach to a high level. You had a GA that was able to kind of bring something that you had been missing. The question is now, does that continue? Does that trend continue? Or do they fall back? Not fall back like if they're not as – I've said this. They're not going to be as good as they were last year. I don't expect them to be. Alabama's not going to be as good as they were last year. But does anyone doubt that Alabama's going to still have a top 5 offensive line? No, they don't. They still will. Notre Dame should be there. That's one position where Notre Dame should be reloading like everybody else that's any good does. And the fact that Notre Dame is not that position, that there is this concern, anyone being objective has to have a concern about that. But if anyone being objective also has to say, we need to see how it goes this year. Because if you're just saying Quinn stinks and he's got to go, to me, that's you going back to what you thought when you first got hired. You're not actually letting the evidence dictate what your opinion should be. You're just kind of sticking with that original opinion. He did a really good job this year. The results were really good this year. If that continues, then we have to be able to say, okay, he's found his footing at Notre Dame. He's doing a good job. If they take a big step back this year, if you're an objective person, you have to be able to say this is problematic, and that shouldn't be happening at Notre Dame. Kevin Thomas says, Heastan currently doesn't have a coaching job. Why don't they bring him in some capacity? I don't think there's interest on either side for that to happen, for that reunion to happen at all. Tom A says, few offense coaches have some recruiting issues for closing deals. I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Matthew Thomas, Kelly and Heastan, wasn't there some bad blood there? Not sure if underlying details to all that. It wasn't necessarily bad blood from what I understand. It's just Kelly's a control freak. And, Kelly likes to be able to walk into a room and say whatever he wants. You weren't walking into Harry Heastan's room and saying anything. You as the head coach were not talking to the offensive line when Harry Heastan was there. And I don't think Coach Kelly liked that. But I've never heard that there was bad blood. I just don't think there's necessarily any desire to rekindle that relationship on either side, especially with Jeff Quinn as the offensive line coach. That's not happening. Brian Kelly's not, because also, and if you're in defense of Coach Kelly, if you're Brian Kelly and you bring in Harry Heastan for some capacity and the offensive line plays well, who's going to get all the credit? It's going to be Harry Heastan. That doesn't help Jeff Quinn. That doesn't help Jeff Quinn as a recruiter. That doesn't help Jeff Quinn's reputation. It doesn't help Jeff Quinn with the players. So, man, I kind of understand it. If Jeff Quinn's your O-line coach, you got to ride that horse, right? That's your choice. You made that decision. You got to go with it, right? And if you don't think he's getting the job done and you think Harry Heastan needs to be brought in to help, then you just need to not do that, and you need to just go get a better offensive line coach. But that's not going to happen. Brian Kelly does not share the same opinion about the offensive line or about Jeff Quinn that we all share. He just doesn't. Matt D said, I'm not sure Harry was a big fan of some aspects of college football, mainly recruiting and it being a year-round deal, but he didn't have to do that. He didn't recruit year-round. Look, people say, well, he didn't like recruiting at the end. He never liked recruiting. It didn't matter. He knew how to get the kids in there that he wanted and that were top players and to build offensive lines. And again, he did go to Ohio State and beat them for guys. But look, Urban Meyer threw everything in the kitchen sink at Tommy Kramer and Liam Michelberg. It didn't work. And Harry didn't have to battle it. They knew exactly where they stood. And I think that's helped. Revolver 6238. Thanks, Brian. You guys are great. Thank you for that very much. Is Wisconsin putting a lot of in-state pressure on the in-state linemen to stay home? Seems like that may be why these guys are still uncommitted. I think I don't want to say pressure. I don't think when I think pressure, Revolver, I think that it's a situation where you say, there's guilt involved or, you can't let your home state down. I don't think that's going on. I think it's just, look, here's the thing. Wisconsin can sell. Look what we do when it comes to offensive line recruiting. Look at what we do. Look at what we bring to the table. Look at the things that we're able to do to develop offensive linemen. I mean, they're not exactly – I'm pulling up their draft history here, but Wisconsin's not exactly a slouch when it comes to producing offensive linemen into the NFL. They have a reputation of developing great offensive lines as well. I mean, so this isn't exactly like some in-state program that's not good at producing great players. I mean, they had a 6th-round pick this year. They had a 4th-round pick the year before that, a 3rd-round pick the year before that, a 5th-year pick that same year. They had a 1st-round pick in 2017, a 2nd-round pick in 2015, 1st-round pick in 2013, a 1st and a 2nd-round pick in 2012, a 1st-round pick in 2011. So, I mean, this is an in-state program that has a strong reputation for offensive line recruiting as well. I think they're selling that as much as anything else. And I think that's the thing that's working for them. And then, of course, at Notre Dame, you don't have a dynamic recruiter that's able to counter that and get those guys. But look, if they go to Wisconsin, they beat Ohio State too, right? I mean, so it's not like, Notre Dame was the only big school going after these kids. But I thought getting 2 out of that state was legitimately possible. I thought you at least need to get 1. I thought 2 was the ideal because look, Notre Dame led for at least 2 of those kids. And to not get any, which that hasn't happened yet. I'm saying if that happens, that to me, that's problematic. There's no question about it. But I don't think it's about pressure. I just think they out-recruited Notre Dame for him. I think it's simple as that. Nolan asks, Brian, do you feel a little vindicated that Freeman has proven what you've been saying for years that Notre Dame can and should be doing more and better? Not really. I mean, because I don't really look at it that way. I don't like, well, see, I was right. That's a lie. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do be like, man, this is what I'm trying to tell people. So I'm not going to lie sometimes, but that's more of a frustration that more people aren't saying that. That's really more my frustration is and why so many people push back against me on that. And they come up with as well, kids don't want to go to class and all this other kind of stuff. But I've been saying this for years, but this isn't the first time I've been proven correct on this. I mean, Chip Long recruited at a pretty high level. Mike Elko recruited at a really high level his 1 year here. Mike Denbrock was a really good recruiter at Notre Dame. Look what Harry Hiestand did on the offensive line. I mean, 2011, Notre Dame signed 3 5-star defensive ends in 2011. So I think it's always been there. And, the proof has always been in the pudding. So do I feel vindicated? Yeah, a little bit. I mean, let's get to signing day and let's see them close because he's done a great job at linebacker, but they got to close on a couple of guys on the defense, guy on the defensive line. They got to get a couple of these DBs. I mean, I'm not vindicated to the point yet because it's about if you're the defensive coordinator, you're responsible for the whole class, and the class isn't done yet. We got to see the class finish up yet before we start kind of hyping them up as I'm vindicated and all this other kind of stuff. Because if they miss out on some of their top targets, if they miss out on the Nwakpa, Benjamin Morrison, Anthony Lucas, Cyrus Moss, and some of those guys, then yeah, the linebacker class is going to be great. But what about the rest of it? Because he doesn't just coach linebackers; he coaches the whole defense. And so I think that would be, let's just what's his number 8? Let it play out. Let's let it play out. Brent Byers, it's not about being a hater. It's about a guy that isn't recruiting well. He isn't maximizing the O-line potential that's inherent at Notre Dame. It's really just factual at this point in time. I disagree. I mean, I agree. I agree with you on that one. Matthew Thomas says, what about having cookouts like other schools have with prominent alumni there in attendance like a Quentin Nelson? I mean, again, I don't think those things are needle movers for Notre Dame. I mean, I don't think they hurt at all, but right now, Quentin Nelson's getting ready for his season. And look, those things are – if a kid if you need that to get a kid, then the kid's not going to end up being real happy here. You need to be able to get him to Notre Dame because of your line coach, because you're OC, because you're coordinator, because of all the things that Notre Dame has to offer. And they kind of did something like that last week. They do have that cookout, or they eat at Brian Kelly's Lake House, which is fun. But I just don't look at it that way. I just don't see it as, boy, they gotta bring in Quentin Nelson or they're not going to get guys. If a kid doesn't want to come to Notre Dame, Quentin Nelson being on campus isn't going to change that. It's going to be cool in that moment, but when the dust settles at the end of the day, it's about what's the product that you're offering this kid. What are you selling to him, and how's that going for you? David Knight, thank you so much for the super chat, buddy. I appreciate it very, very much. Brian, as always, we love the show. Thank you. One thing I would like to say is that we have an awesome chat room. Everyone is cohesive, complimentary, and very respectful. All of this is a win-win, and that's something I do like about this. The funny thing is, David, it actually makes what we're doing a little harder, because you'll see Vince especially, and today I'm the only one here, and I'm kind of struggling with it, but it's like, okay, I got to scroll through like all these conversations you guys are having to get to the next question, which it's not a complaint, because I love that you guys have this relationship, and especially when we stick to football and we leave politics and stuff out of the chat room. But I think that's a lot of fun. It just sometimes can make it a little tough to get to that next question, because I got to kind of scroll down a couple, because you guys are answering questions and going back and forth. And then there's sometimes when someone will ask a question, then I'll answer it. And because we're 30, 40 minutes behind. Like right now, the question I'm on now, the next question I'm on now is going to be at the like the 131 mark or 133 mark, and it's 3:00. So I'm way behind. And then I'll see that somebody's already answered the question. And but I love that. It's one of the fun things about it. Like, look, I'll be honest with you. I'm dragging today. I'm tired. It's been a long summer. I'm working hard. I didn't go to bed till like 3:30 last night working. And part of me just wanted to not do a show today. But it's y'all that made me kind of say, you know what, let's do it. And yeah, we can't think of a topic. Let's just do a mailbag. And everybody will be there, and it'll be a lot of fun. It's that community. And it's the reason I showed up today. And I'm trying to bring my A game as best as possible. But there's been a couple days like that recently where I'm just like, I don't want to do a show today. But then it's like, but then I'm not going to get to talk to David and Brandon and the Dillons and and Old Grim and Ronald and I mean Matt D and all these people. I could name all these cats, that are Jeff Fluke and John Klimek and all these guys that are part of the show and always ask questions and all that. And that's kind of says, you know what, suck it up. Was it rule number 76, right? No excuses, play like a champion. And that's what we're trying to do. So Brennan Manning, hey guys, sorry for being late. No problem. Brian, what have you been hearing on Brennan Vernon? It seems like there's been a major momentum shift towards Notre Dame as recruitment. Kudos to Freeman if he can pull it off. I'm going to say something right now. I've been saying for weeks, I don't think Notre Dame has a shot at Brennan Vernon. I haven't heard a whole lot different than that, but I know that other people are hearing different than that. And I'm going to say right now, like I don't have any new intel on this beyond what's being reported by other people. Okay, so I'm just getting that out there right now. I don't have any new intel on Brennan Vernon, but I'll say this. If Notre Dame can go to Mentor, Ohio, get a kid from that high school away from Ohio that Ohio State wants, I don't think people understand. If you're from Ohio, you understand how huge that is. That is no different, in my opinion, than going down to Tuscaloosa and getting a stud kid from Tuscaloosa that Alabama wants. That's how big that would be, because he's a big-time recruit that Ohio State wants if Notre Dame were to get him. And I don't know if they will. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that's what I have friends texting me, hey, so-and-so saying this, so-and-so saying that. What are you hearing? I'm not hearing anything on that, But if that is true, for Marcus Freeman and Mike Elston to be able to do that, that is about as big of a coup as you can get recruiting-wise, because that's just not a battle that Ohio State loses. It's just not. So if they're able to do that, that would be – and again, you say kudos to Freeman, and yes, Marcus Freeman's a part of that, but Mike Elston's a big part of that too. And it's kind of like we're at this thing now when Marcus Freeman helps Mike Elston get over the finish line with Aiden Guevara and Tyson Ford, he gets all the credit. But the reality is, if Mike Elston wasn't doing the job that he was doing, they're not there to get over the finish line. That's how recruiting should be done. And so I think Mike Elston also deserves a ton of credit for this, because it's the D-line coach too. I mean, Marcus Freeman can't recruit everybody. And I think that Mike Elston's doing a tremendous job with the defensive line recruiting, and then that's allowing Marcus Freeman to even be more impactful to where, Mike Elston can get you here, which is very impressive, but then you need that help to get you over the edge. And that's why I've always said you need coordinators that can recruit. You need a head coach that's going to recruit, because that's the difference. A position coach can't be the only guy getting it done. I mean, Tony Alford lost a lot of battles when he was here for guys he really wanted because he wasn't getting the help from the head coaching standpoint of things. So, that's important. I mean, that would be a huge thing now. So, Jonathan, with the optimism today, I love it. Calling it now, Notre Dame 2023-24 national champion. So, are you saying they're going to win 2 years in a row, or are you saying they're going to win that 23 season that the championship's in 24? I'm curious about that, but still, either way, that's huge. I think we're a 10-2, 11-1 team for 21 and 22, but 23 should be the year. I feel like everything comes together. Possibly that 23 schedule is not going to be any easier too. They still have both Clemson and Ohio State, but look, they got to get the line going. They got to close out on some of these skill players, and they've got to make the necessary changes on offense that we talked about earlier, which is, again, a little concerning. Gabe Weiss, what trade would you make, like an NFL trade, with Notre Dame and any team that benefits both teams? Wow. I would call Ohio State, and I'd be willing to give up one of my defensive linemen for Garrett Wilson. That's what I would do. That'd be the only thing I could think of. I mean, if I could get a dynamic receiver like that, I would do that. To me, there's no quarterback that I would say, yeah, get that guy and you're going to win the title. There's no Trevor Lawrence. Now, that guy may emerge. There's one quarterback I wouldn't mind trading for, but I'm not going to get into that today because that would start World War III, I think, in this chat room. And it would definitely cause other message boards to explode. But there's no Trevor Lawrence. There's no Justin Fields. There's no proven quarterback. There's no Mac Jones or Tua or whatever the case may be, Deshaun Watson. So I'd want, and I like Jack Cohn. So I'd maybe go for a skill player there, or maybe call up LSU and be like, hey, we got 3 pretty good quarterbacks, or, maybe, hey, if you need some help here at this position, maybe this offensive lineman, we'll trade you this offensive lineman for, one of your corners, and a future first-round pick for Derek Stingley. That would be one I would like to make because he's big time. But yeah, that'd be interesting. So David Knight says Sierre, Jonas, and Theo was a nice trifecta. But remember, David, when somebody just texted me, they got my reference on the one quarterback I would want back. Sierre, Jonas, and Theo, that year that they were together in 2011, Theo was still playing slot receiver. So he was still a receiver that year. Theo didn't move back to running back, I think, until late in the year when Jonas got hurt is when he moved back to running back. So they weren't technically a trifecta, but yes, they were 3 very good running backs together. Let's see here if we got some more questions here. A lot of comments, a lot of discussion. Love it. You see, this is one of those times. This is one of those times that I'm referring to. All right, Notre Dame 2164. Some Notre Dame fans are saying we need to try and flip Jaheim Otis, who is 6'4" inches and 370 pounds. I don't see him fitting into the defense that Notre Dame runs. O'Brien, I'm still in Panama City. You just had to rub that in, didn't you? Didn't you? Oh, see, you're lucky I don't know your name because I was about to say some things about you. But no, I hope you're having a great time on your vacation, buddy. But another person just correctly guessed the quarterback that I'm referring to. It's not that hard if you think about it for like a second. They don't need that kind of nose guard. They don't. And that's what I've said. You got to understand there's 2 types of 3-down defenses. There's a 2-gap and a 1-gap. A 1-gap is more about quickness and attacking and those type of things. You don't need a big guy for that. The 2-gap is the one where you need that real big Lewis Nix kind of guy, a Terrence Cody kind of guy that Alabama, those nose tackles Alabama used to have. If you're going to play that kind of 3-down defense, yeah, you need that kind of guy. You need like 285-pound ends and that kind of deal. That's not the 3-down defense that Notre Dame is going to play. You know what? Let me write this down. We're going to do a football 101 on this here very soon because I think this would be a great topic. I'm sorry, I got to talk out loud. I'm getting old. 3-gap or 2-gap versus 1-gap and the 3-down. So we are going to do a football 101 over that this summer. I think it's a great topic. I think it'll be a lot of fun. I think we could all learn a little something about it and get a chance to show a little bit of film as to what I'm talking about. Old Grim says, how many of the other coaches are working with Quinn on the O-line recruits? Well, I know Tommy Reese is, and I believe Brian Kelly is as well. This isn't just Quinn just doing his own thing. All right. Roderick Blackman says, Ben Morrison and Nwangpa and Moore, are they silent commits because all three are studs to me? Well, I'm not going to say if they are or are not silent commits. Not all those guys, and I definitely would not say all those guys are. I do feel good about where Notre Dame stands with at least two of those three guys and potentially all three of those guys. But if they get all three of those guys, Roderick, to your point, that would be one heck of a DB class. And you've already got Jaden Mickey in the class, who I really like. He had a really good junior season. If you add those three guys, that would be about as, and then maybe if you could add Jake Pope as your fifth DB, that'd be one heck of a DB class. That'd be something to start. Plus, with the front seven that they're already doing, that, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a better defensive class in the entire country if they land those three guys. I mean, you really would. That'd be an elite class, because part of being an elite class isn't just having a great linebacker class or a great DN class or even a great corner. It's about having really good players and top-level players on all three levels. You'd literally have a five-star upside player, at least one. And in some of the positions, you'd have two. You'd have – well, actually, so you'd have – by my ranking, you'd have at least two five-star – let me pull this up. I think that all three of the commits on the D-line I have given a five-star upside grade to, but I'm going to pull that up real quick. But you'd have at least two. I can't remember if I bumped up Aiden Gabera. So Tyson Ford, I gave a five-star upside grade for. Aiden Gabera, I have a five-star upgrade for, and then Darren Agu. So all three of the DNs, I gave a five-star upside grade to. I haven't done that since 2011. And technically, I've never done that because I didn't do the second grade in 2011. But if I did, I would have certainly given five-star upside grades to those three guys. I did not give five-star upside grades to the 2016 guys. Dalen Hayes had it. I didn't give one to Julian Okwara and Khalid Crean. They were like 4.5-star upside guys, I believe. So you've got that. You got three five-star upside guys there. You have one five-star upside guy right now, linebacker, in Josh Burnham. You'd have two if you get Jalen Sneed, and then in the secondary you'd have a five-star upside guy in Xavier Nwangpa. So that would certainly be a big one there. And I'm gonna pull up here Benjamin Morrison because I think I might have given him a five-star upside grade. I don't actually know what now that I think about it, I don't think that I did, but he was someone that I considered giving one to. So he is a 4.5-star upside, which is a top 50 guy, but still very high. So you'd have at least one five-star upside guy on all three levels of the defense if they got the class that you're talking about, Roderick, which is rare. That doesn't happen often. And in the two front seven positions, you'd have three and then two. That would be really, really impressive. Matthew Lass asked this. We talked about this earlier. Does anyone know if Blake Fisher will be Zach Rice's player host? He was a great recruiter for the 21 class. Don't know if he will be, but I'll be surprised if he isn't, to be honest with you. Jojo, welcome to the show. I know you're a little bit late. All righty. John DeCrisio, Mike Singer interviews Mike Goolsby for analysis. He just did it to review the commitment of Junior Tuihalamaka. Do you ever talk to Mike Goolsby for his take on things? We've chatted a few times. Mike has shared his thoughts with me on a few things before. I haven't talked to him a ton, but I get along well with Mike. I respect him a lot as a player. Back in that 04 team, or the 04 team. I still remember how well he played down at Tennessee. But we'll chat a little bit. Mike's a good guy. We talk about football. I'll share my opinion. He'll share his opinion, and we just talk ball. It's not really debates as much. It's just, hey, what are your thoughts on this, and what are your thoughts on this? So I mean, I probably shouldn't say that because he'll probably get in trouble for talking to me. I don't know if that's allowed there, but no, he's a good guy. I like Mike. Let's see here. Jordan says, hi, guys. Brian, can you explain how this SI thing works? Because it seems like you're working for Sports Illustrated, but you have said you work for yourself and you're the one in charge. So I don't work for Sports Illustrated. They don't write my checks. Basically, they host my site, and we're partners, essentially. It's not like Rivals. It's not like 247 Sports. We're partners. I'm an independent publisher. I have my own company. I have Driscoll Publishing, and we're our own site. If SI folded tomorrow, Irish Breakdown still exists, right? So it's my own site. The other thing is, Rivals and 247, there's a little bit more directive coming from the top on how you're supposed to write, what you're supposed to write, things like that. Not specific topics, but like, these things are important and these things are whatever. They have their own ranking systems and all those kind of things. With me, it's more of I'm an independent site, and we partner with SI. And of course, part of that partnerships is we have memberships, and if you sign up for a membership, and I'm hoping if the message board conversation goes well here next week, and we're able to launch a message board, I'm going to start a membership push again, because the message board, and then part of that is you get the SI magazine. So we're partners, but I'm an independent publisher. I started working here in September of 2019, and no one has ever told me, hey, you got to write this, you need to write that way, whatever the case may be. We have publisher meetings, and so it's kind of like, we have publisher meetings and we work together. There's good camaraderie and teamwork there, and we're part of a group, but it's like a bunch of independent sites that are partnering and being hosted by SI, and then we'll work with them. But like, I don't talk to SI writers. They don't talk to me. They don't ask me about things. I've only interviewed, I think maybe once, an SI writer for a site, but like I'll get John Garcia from SI 99, from SI All American, and and we're partners, but I don't work for him. He doesn't work for me. SI, I don't work for SI. They don't write my checks, right? And so there's not a deal where, like with Rivals, you get paid X amount of dollars, you're part of them. That's not how it works here. So this is my site. I run it how I want to run it, and that's just how it goes. So, and then they can decide that they don't want my site with them anymore, and I could decide to leave if I wanted to. But I like the partnership, and I like some of the things that they provide, and I'm happy with how it's going. But I hope that answers your question, Jordan. Louis Derschel says, how time intensive is the recruiting process for the kids with all the media outlets as well as comments about daily convos with coaches? It sounds like they'd be constantly on the phone or visiting, and that's true. That's why a lot of these kids they'll end up shutting the media out. Because think about this. If a kid gets offered by Notre Dame, you've got Rivals, you've got 247 Sports, you've got and Mike Frank's independent site, you've got us, and you've got about 3 or 4 other just fan sites. That's 7, like at least 7 or 8. You have Indie Insider. You have at least 7 or 8 entities that are going to reach out to that kid to talk to him. If a kid commits, the same thing. If a kid in the same week gets offered by Notre Dame and Ohio State and Alabama, let's say, there's a ton of Ohio State sites. You got Rivals, you got 247, you've got the SI site, you've got 11 Warriors, you've got all these Ohio State sites. And then there's a bunch of Alabama sites, plus newspapers are getting into this more. So just 3 offers, and all of a sudden this kid's going to have 20-some reporters calling him up or texting him or hitting him up for DMs. That alone can be overwhelming. Plus you've got a head coach, coordinator, position coach, all these people calling you. It can be overwhelming. And that's why I've always said that, it's good for kids to lay down the ground rules. I remember one time I texted a parent, and I ended up becoming good friends with this parent. Still talk to him to this day. His kid's not at Notre Dame anymore. But the first interaction was I texted his kid, and he said, hey, listen, my son doesn't do reporting interviews until he's done his homework. And when he's done his homework, I have him call you. So I said, well, look, how about I go through you instead of through your son? That way you can, do it. And it ended up working out great. Had a good relationship with the son, had a great relationship with him. And it worked out great. So to me, that's, I think that's what I wish more parents were able to do that. But a lot of parents can't do that because they're working 2 jobs and doing all these kind of things and having a hard time with that. It would have been tough for my parents to be able to do that. But, that it is an incredibly taxing experience for these young people. There's no question about it. Jordan Schreiber, Jack Cohn is awesome. He's thrown for 4,000 yards this year. I like where your head's at, Jordan. I like where your head's at. Jordan also asked, maybe you already mentioned this, but has Penn State even the odds with Singleton again? Not that I've been told from my sources. No. I still feel good about where Notre Dame stands. But again, until the kid commits, you've got to keep working. We saw it. Look, there's been kids that have been in the class silently for a while now that right now it's not looking good for us. At the end of the day, you got to close. That's ultimately what matters. Strange 369. Hi, everyone. Hello. I think that's a new person. I don't remember that one. So welcome to the chat. Christopher Jenkins says, if Notre Dame misses on Taylor and Rice but gets 2/3 of the Wisconsin whiskey linemen, how would you rate this O-line class overall? That's a very good offensive line class. So let's just say they get Schrouth and Bruner or Hinsman and Bruner. So one of the interior guys plus Bruner. To me, that's a really good class. I'd probably rank Bruner 3rd or 4th in that class. He's a consensus top 100 recruit. Now, I don't think he's a top 100 recruit. I think he's more like 150 to 200. That's still really good. So I'd be a great class. Be a great offensive line class. And if they kind of went up to 5 and then you brought in Ashton Craig along with that group of 4, that'd be an elite offensive line class. I'd be thrilled with that, Christopher. I think I'd be thrilled with that. Right now, it doesn't look like they're going to get 2 of the 3 Wisconsin offensive linemen. But if they can rebound and get those 2 guys, that's great. And that's great. That's an excellent class right there. John Rich says, I just hope they don't get too nervous and settle. It's like the old way of dating. She's a 1 at 10 and a 10 at 1. Oh, my goodness. All righty. Let's get some more questions. Yeah. Thanks for this, Tommy. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Jojo says, Coach D and Sean obviously isn't with us anymore. You guys think Junior's game is more similar to Manti or Tavon Coney? I think their games are I think both of their games are very similar. I think Junior's right in that same wheelhouse. Manti was more dynamic than Tavon was, but they were both, neither of them were great athletes, although Manti was a better athlete than Tavon, but they were both very instinctive, very powerful. Manti was obviously bigger. I think body type wise, Junior is a lot more like Manti. I think instinctively he's a lot more like Manti. I think character-wise he's a lot more like Manti than he was Tavon Coney, which is really important. So I think he's more like Manti, but I think Manti and Tavon Coney are kind of from the similar style of player. Tavon wasn't a very good athlete. I mean, he had one of the worst pro day performances I've ever seen. There's a drill you do where the coach, the scout has you backpedal on a line. So like you're running from sideline to sideline. You're not going the whole way, but it's like that angle, right? So you get like on like the 10-yard line. And you backpedal, right? And then they send you in a direction. You've got to flip your hips, and then they'll send you another direction. You got to flip your hips, and the goal is to stay on the line. Because if you have to flip your hips and you move off the line, it tells them that you have tight hips, and it's going to hurt you in coverage. And so Drew Tranquil does it, and Drew's just like, bam, right on the line. He's flipping his hips. He's clean. He's smooth. And then Tavon does it, and he turns it into a zigzag drill. And that's not what you want. That says you got really tight hips and really tight ankles. And that was one of the reasons that he ended up – I mean, there were some off the field things that kept Tavon from being drafted and why he's not in the NFL right now. But there was also just that lack of athleticism is something that hindered him as well. There's some people freaking out about Bradshaw. I definitely D-Rock, I don't drink, but if I did, this would be one of those days, buddy, for so many different reasons. Matthew Lass says, sounds like guys like Amorion and Aomanor and guys with enough speed to stretch the field. Williams, Merriweather, and Anderson could be possession guys. That's not really how it works, though, Matthew. That's the thing is whether one guy's fast or one guy's more of they're the same type of player, though. You know what I mean? And it's they can stretch the field, but who's the guy you're throwing the slant to? Neither one of those guys are that guy. You don't know that Aomanor is that kind of guy. He hasn't shown it on film. You're going off of what he did at Notre Dame's camp. Well, Jay Brunell earned an offer at Notre Dame's camp. He wasn't, that didn't translate, the way that you would hope. Ashton White's a guy that earned an offer at Notre Dame's camp. He didn't do anything. So to me, it's like, it's all fine that they've convinced themselves that, hey, we got all these big guys with similar skills, with different skill sets. No, you don't. You really don't. So one guy's a little faster than another guy. The other thing, too, is I would put Merriweather in the first category. I think Merriweather is definitely a stretch field guy. He's the closest thing they have to a big guy that's got the more diverse skill set. But even then, all 5 of those guys are basically the same kind of player. All those guys are doing damage up to the point of the catch. That's just the way that it is. That's the way that, I mean, you look, I understand you're trying to convince yourself of that maybe, or maybe you actually believe that. I just don't agree with that. To me, one guy stretches the field, one guy's a possession guy. They're still playing the game basically the same way. And I don't think either one of those guys are guys that are going to stretch the field against Bama, against Clemson, against Oklahoma. I don't see it. So Matthew also says, don't necessarily have the shifty Tyreek Hill type of guy, but while all those players are big bodies, I do think they allow you to do different things. But I don't think they do. You're running the same routes with those guys, right? And here's the deal. Who's the guy that you have to come up for? Who's the guy that you have to be concerned about? I mean, if you've got all these big players that are possession guys, you're just going to stay back. But again, here's my other question. What about when you play a team like Clemson, like Notre Dame did in 2018? Are any of those guys any better than Chase Claypool or Miles Boykin? No, they're the same kind of guy. Now, Chase and Miles Boykin were 6'4", and both ran low 4.4s. Does anybody want to tell me that that those guys are going to necessarily be more dynamic than those two guys were? But the fact of the matter is you played that game, and you played against a really good Clemson defensive line, and you didn't necessarily have the time to stretch the field. So what you needed was a guy that you could get the ball out quickly to and go do work. Who was that guy? You didn't have that guy. And that's the problem. If you don't have that guy, then you're going to be in trouble, because there's going to be teams that are going to be good enough to take away your big guys. They're going to have a safety that can kind of protect you against that. And then now what do you do? If you look at the Alabama game this past year, right? Notre Dame took away Bama's deep ball. So what did Bama do? They just bubble screen, slant, bam, big plays. Who's doing that for Notre Dame with this group of players? Who's doing that? You better hope Lorenzo Styles pans out. But even him, he's more of a vertical player too. But he's a guy that at least has the speed and the shiftiness. He can make some plays. But if he doesn't pan out, I mean, who on your roster is going to be doing that in 2-3 years? That's the problem. And again, it's not that any of those guys aren't good players. It's about what kind of group are you putting together. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Richard Robinson, you are quite right about wide receiver, Brian. Irish needs speedy, dynamic receivers. You would think they would have learned after Smith destroyed them. It's not just that. It's Smith. It's Amari Rodgers. I mean, we could have a long conversation about those kind of guys, right? But it's not just need. If they were just bringing in small, if I'd be having the same argument if they only landed like 4 Xavier Bradshaw type of guys. I'd have the same argument. Okay, you got these shifty guys, but what about when you're playing a team that's really athletic? Or what if you need to stretch the field? Or what if they're taking away your quick game? Who's the guy that's going to stretch the field? Who's the guy that's going to win the one-on-ones on the outside? They have the same conversation. It's about building the right kind of mentality. And then Matthew said, A for effort, Matthew. I also think we're forgetting about the possibility of using our running backs and McCaffrey way to work the middle of the field and the passing game out of the backfield. So when this class shows up, who's that running back? That's not Chris Tyree. Chris Tyree is making plays out of the backfield. He's going to make plays on the perimeter. Who's that running back that's going to do that? Audric Estime? Logan Diggs? Jadarian Price? Nicholas Singleton? Who's that back? Christian McCaffrey doesn't play for Notre Dame. Kyron Williams is going to be gone. So who's that running back going to be? I mean, it sounds great in theory, but who's that guy going to be? And then how often are you going to have that guy out there? And then at that point in time, if you have to put that guy out there that often, teams are going to kind of figure that out, right? The reason it works this year, and what I'm so excited about this year, is because you can't just key on Kyron Williams in that way, because you have Lawrence Keys, you have Avery Davis, you have Braden Lindsey, right? So I appreciate your effort, but I mean, that's a lot of I'm trying to how to say this because I don't want to disrespect you, Matthew, because I understand where you're coming from, and I know that's exactly what Notre Dame has convinced himself from, but that's a lot of just you got to really work hard to make that make sense. And then the other thing is, where has that worked? Who's won that way? You're just not seeing it, right? I mean, the teams that are the best offenses have diversity at wide receiver. They just do. And sometimes it's only one guy. And that's what I'm saying is I'm not saying that you need to recruit 3 Xavier Bradshaws. Just give me one. Just one. And that would work. But they're not doing that. Louis also asked, why do you think Kelly has gone so far away from his quick tempo spread offense that worked well at Cincinnati? I feel like that's what set him apart as an offensive coach. It's the Bama game of 2012. I think it's it. He's been trying to be Bama ever since then. What did Bama have? Big receivers, good tight ends. I mean, they were hitting them with the tight end, the corner routes early in that game, running the ball down their throat. He's been trying to chase Alabama ever since. I had hoped that after getting embarrassed by Clemson and Alabama at the end of this year with dynamic receivers, that would cause him to wake up and do that. And it looks like they are for 2021. I'm just concerned that they're not doing it for 2022. Having said that, the counter argument to that is maybe they don't like the shorter slot guys in the 2022 class. Maybe they don't like Xavier Bradshaw. Well, they clearly don't like Xavier Bradshaw. I think that's a mistake. I think that's a huge mistake. To not even bring him for a visit, to me, is a mistake. Maybe they're going to add those guys next year. Maybe they look at it and say, hey, look, we're going to try to bring Keys and Lindsey back in 2021 too, and we have Xavier Watts. Maybe they like Xavier more than I think they do. I hope that that's right. We have Styles, so the devil's advocate argument which would be a better argument than trying to, manipulate into saying like, okay, a bunch of big guys is going to work that play basically the exact same way, is maybe that's what they're looking for in 2023. Jaylen Brown, they had him on campus, Jalen Hale. There's some guys like that in 2023. Maybe they think they can get them. And then you've got Styles in 2021, and then you've got Xavier Watts in 2020, and maybe you feel like you're going to have enough for the next 2 years, and then you bring those guys into 2023, and there you go. Maybe that's it. And I hope that's true. I hope this is about me and Notre Dame having a disagreement on Xavier Bradshaw. That's what I hope this is about. I truly, if we're being honest and objective, I've stated my case on what I think this is. But if I'm wrong, and it's a situation where they just don't like Xavier, but they are trending in that direction, and it just happens to be a year where the receivers they like are bigger guys. Next year, they're going to focus on more dynamic types of receivers. Okay, that's fine. As long as I can live with the disagreement about Xavier Bradshaw. I can. I'm not to the point where it's like, I think I'm right on him, obviously, or I wouldn't have the opinion. They think they're right on him, obviously, or they wouldn't be making the decision that they're making. But I'm okay disagreeing with them on some kids. The concern I have is if this signals that the offense is going to still look like it has in recent years and not what it needs to look like, that's the bigger issue for me. If this is simply about 2022, there's just not that guys on the board. Caleb Brown wasn't a fit. And Xavier Bradshaw, we just don't like him as a player to the level, whatever. But next year, we're recruiting a bunch of those guys. We're going to get big guys this year. Next year, we're going to recruit dynamic players. Okay, cool. I can live with that. I care more about the ability to defend or to have an offense that's going to have the right philosophy. I care more about that than just Xavier Bradshaw. My frustration today and my reaction is coming from I'm concerned about what them not liking Xavier Bradshaw means for the direction of their offense. If I'm wrong about that, even if I'm right on Xavier Bradshaw, then they're okay. They just disagree. I just disagree with them on this particular player, but I still like the direction that they're trying to go. So that would be my counter argument to the things I've said before. I think that's a better counter argument than trying to justify having that kind of offense that they've had. It just may be that this class didn't have that kind of player that fit at Notre Dame. That could be true. Matthew Lass, how many LBs in the country have the speed to cover Tyree? None. But again, he's not a receiver. You're not going to put Chris Tyree in the slot for 30 snaps a game. You're just not, because then that's 30 snaps. You're not having him in the backfield. So now you're having to take away what would be your most dynamic running back to put him a receiver for a bunch of parts of the game. That doesn't work either. It works because you can use him at times to play that. I would not put Kyron Williams as my every down slot, because then you're taking away from what he does at running back. And again, how many years is Chris Tyree going to be on campus when this 2022 class shows up? Maybe one, hopefully two, but probably one, So you can kind of spin it any way you want, Matthew, but one running back isn't going to change that, especially when that running back's not going to be on campus for very long when this class shows up. There are better arguments to be made about how this Xavier Bradshaw thing doesn't signify it, but trying to convince yourself that, well, no, it's okay to have a bunch of big vertical-oriented players and no guys at the skill position that can do stuff after the catch because they have a running back. That's not how it works. Because what if that one running back gets hurt? What do you do then? What if you have to play him at running back? Well, what do you do on those plays? Then you start telegraphing what you're doing. Well, you're not going to put Chris Tyree in the slot for 30 snaps, and you're not going to run the ball 25 times in those plays, right? Because otherwise, what are you doing? You're going to put him in there to get him the ball. Well, that tells the defense, hey, Tyree's in the slot. We're going to play him. So then it's not about a linebacker covering him. They're going to double cover him. And they know it's going to be passed, so maybe they zone drop underneath him. That's the thing, is it's just not as simple as saying, oh, you put Chris Tyree there. Well, how long is he going to be there? And then what happens if he's not there, or he gets hurt, or he leaves early? Then what do? You put Audric Estime there? It's just not how it works. But I do appreciate your effort. And I'm not saying that to be condescending at all. I do. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and I get the need of Notre Dame fans to want to justify it in their heads. I get it. It's better than accepting the fact that they're just making a mistake. I get it. I think there's better arguments about that, though. I think if you wanted to have an argument, it's like, okay, maybe they just disagree with you about, maybe Driscoll, maybe you're right about or wrong about Xavier Bradshaw. They still plan on making the change offensively, but they just don't think he's the guy that's going to really do that. Okay, cool. We can have that conversation. But to defend having the style of offense that they've had that just has not worked. Because are you really telling me that the group of receivers they're bringing in are going to be more dynamic than Chase Claypool and Cole Kmet, Miles Boykin, and guys that they've already had? Michael Floyd? It hasn't worked. The most explosive pass offense they had was when they had smaller guys. If you're going to err on the side of it, I'd rather err on the side of that. But even then, that group lacked the diversity. You didn't have that big guy that could just go make plays when teams had good athletes. They could have really used that. Corey Robinson that year really wasn't that guy. He wasn't the same dude he was before. But you look at the USC game in 2015. Will Fuller made the big plays early, but it was Corey Robinson that made some really big catches late in the game using his size. I think that factors into that as well. Brent Byer says, we also had very limited quarterbacks, but couldn't push the ball further than 10 yards down the field. It's not that he couldn't, it's that he wouldn't. There's a difference. And, I mean, that's true-ish. But, again, the windows are going to be a lot tighter when you have those kind of guys. And even then, Trevor Lawrence didn't have those type of receivers because, yes, he had Ross and Higgins, but he also had Hunter Renfrow. He also had Amari Rodgers. He had those different. He had a complement. He had a running back that could do it. So it wasn't just a running back; it was a running back, a couple really good slot guys, and they were different. Hunter Renfrow was more of a work the middle of the field. He wasn't necessarily after the catch guy. He was a great route runner. Then you had Amari Rodgers, who was more of the after the catch kind of guy. Diversity. That's the key. Let's see here. I get the frustration. Matthew, you're killing me today. Don't think Joe Alt is the number 3 guy in last year's class. I think okay, fine. You can't be Notre Dame and Pat Coogan's your number 3 guy. You can't be Notre Dame and Caleb Johnson's your number 3 guy. You could say he's underrated, but we'll have to agree to disagree. We'll have to agree to disagree on that. Brian Dembo says, watched early, had to take care of some business. Coach, you sound deflated. What happened since the show started? I'm not deflated. I'm just frustrated. And I hope that my frustrations are unwarranted. And I hope that, in a couple of weeks, we're looking at this a little bit different. And it's just more of a Xavier Bradshaw difference. But basically what it comes down to is Notre Dame is, according to Tom Loy from Irish Illustrated, Notre Dame is not recruiting, is not bringing Xavier Bradshaw in, which tells me kind of some things I've been hearing about. They kind of know how they're going to finish out the class, and it's not going to include him. It's going to include bigger guys. And that's a concern for me in that it's going to mean that Notre Dame is going to go back to the big boy football that they had at receiver, which works great against Navy and Duke and Syracuse and programs like that, but hasn't really worked much when you play Clemson, when you play Georgia, when you've played Miami, when you've played Alabama, Ohio State. It just hasn't worked against those teams. But it's going to get you 10-2, but can it get you over the hump? That's kind of where I'm coming from. But I also think there's a chance that it could be a deal where this isn't a sign that it's going to be that way. It could just be a sign that they don't agree with me on Xavier Bradshaw, right? So I think there's 2 ways to look at that. I'm looking at it one way, but we're going to have to see how it plays out. It could not be that. It could just, so let's see how they recruit 2023. If they keep recruiting those kind of guys in 2023, then it's obviously a little bit of a different story. I still like Paul's happy story about his then girl that was trying to date him. I just passed that in the comments, sending him tickets to 2015 Notre Dame USC. I'd have married her too, Paul, if I were you. This is a great comment. Brent says, people often confuse being realistic with being even not even realistic, just objective, because I could be wrong, but it's just being objective. It's not always sunshine and roses. Can't live with your head in the clouds. You have to set realistic expectations. We're not scum fans. LOL. Good comment. Good comment. Nolan says, I try not to question the coaches much because they are where they are for a reason, but the complete lack of offense in big postseason games is rough. It looks like the other team knows what's coming. That's kind of been the issue. Matt D asks, Chris Watt was the key to that success possibly last year. Could be, but again, that's why this is such a big year for Jeff Quinn. If Jeff Quinn can get this offensive line playing well, then there's zero Harry Hiestand influence on the 2021 offensive line. Zero. I wouldn't count Josh Lugg as the same kind of guy as the others. Coach Hiestand coached him for 1 year. He was way down the depth chart as a true freshman that year. It wasn't like Eichenberg, and it wasn't like Hainsey and Kramer, these guys that he coached them. So and there's no Chris Watt. So if the offensive line plays to the standard this year, and again, the standard is kind of like it's a range. It doesn't always mean Joe Moore Award finalist. That's not going to be true every year. It's not true of Bam every year. But it is like, hey, you have to have like that 5 to 8 kind of team every year, and then the next year, you know, when all your starters come back, then you jump up to be a Joe Moore finalist. But you can't go from 2017, you win the Joe Moore Award, and then you're not even in the picture again really until 2020. You can't have that. Your lows can't be as low, and that's a concern. So if he prevents the low from being as low as it was maybe in 2018 and definitely in 2019, you know, then to me that tells me, okay, like he's got this thing rolling. He's got it going. If you have a big step back this year, like a big step, then the questions about, okay, was it Chris Watt? Was it the work Harry Hiestand, you know, the influence that Harry Hiestand had? Is that the reason for it? Those questions aren't going to get louder for Coach Quinn. But if he can put a really good product on the field this year, then I think those questions, they're not only get quiet, they have to be erased from a coaching standpoint. And again, we'll have to see how the recruiting class pans out. But from a coaching standpoint, those questions have to be out the door. And so that's why this is a big year for him. And that's why I said yesterday, let's just kind of let this next several months play out first before we because I think what's happening right now is, and it's understandable, and I'm having that reaction too. My reaction to Xavier Bradshaw being canceled is as much about, it's as much about my concerns about what the Notre Dame staff has done as it is about maybe just specifically looking at this incident as an isolated, they just don't think he's a good player. So I'm bringing past frustrations into this conversation. I'm just being honest about it. If I'm wrong about that, and it's just a difference of opinion on Xavier Bradshaw specifically, then it's going to end up being okay, because then they'll go get those guys in 2023. Maybe they'll get a grad transfer that, you know, or another transfer that has some eligibility left that brings some of that skill set. Okay. Maybe they say they're looking at their numbers saying, hey, look, we're going to bring Keys, Lindsey, and all back next year. Right. Maybe that's it. Who knows? So we have to let it play out to a degree. I'm going to voice my frustration. I'm going to tell you what I think it is, but then also I think it would be unwise, maybe is the word, not doing my job the right way if I didn't also present what the counter argument could be to that. And I think we can all hope that the counter argument is the correct one. And I think the same thing is true with the offensive line, Matt, is Jeff Quinn, my frustration with what's going on with Jeff Quinn, my concern about the offensive line is as much about my feeling when he was hired, which is Jeff Quinn's a good offensive line coach, but Notre Dame doesn't need a good offensive line coach. They need a great offensive line coach. And the fact that the guys that they could have had at that point in time, I just think would have been better options. So, yeah, when you have lack of success, that's going to be a part of that. That's human nature. But I think you have to also, as a fan and especially as an analyst, I have to be willing to say, okay, I didn't think he was going to be a good hire, but I have to give him the ability to prove me wrong. And if every time something doesn't go as planned, I just jump back to the guy's a bum, they never should have hired him, that's unprofessional, and that makes me look bad. But I also then have to still be critical of the job he does, but not take my preconceived notions of he shouldn't be here anyway into the conversation. So that's why I say we have to give Jeff Quinn this 2021 season and really the whole 2021 season to really be able to say one way or the other about, was it a Harry Hiestand influence, which includes Chris Watt, or has Jeff Quinn figured this thing out? And that's why I say, yeah, I'm frustrated, but let's let this class play out. They haven't lost any of the Wisconsin offensive linemen. Last I checked, we've been at this a long time, but last I checked, all those kids are still uncommitted. He could rebound. And that's recruiting, right? There's guys that Notre Dame's going to get all the time that they had to come back for. I mean, Marcus Freeman, from everything that we've been told, was kind of set to LSU, but Notre Dame stepped up and they made a comeback and they got it. They got it done. That's what you do here. We talked about this with Jalen Seed, guys that visited, where other schools do a great job, and you got to kind of get it back, and they get it done, right? And hopefully we'll get it done with Jalen Snead. So that's why I say, let's let it play out. I think it's still under the 20.5. I think it's still under that right now. But that's why I say we can be frustrated. We can voice our frustrations. But I think we also have to be open to the idea that maybe what we think is going on isn't what's going on. And what's really going on is they've got this, they got that, this other thing, and here's what's really happening. And then you say, okay, well, then it plays out, ends up being okay. And that's what I'm hoping happens. And that's that's where I'm at on this. Allison T, what is your outlook on special teams this year? Are Dorr, Bramlett sticking around? They're both back. I think this special team should be really, really good. I think the coverage units are going to be good again. They were really good the last couple of years. Jay Brown, I think, is going to end up being one of the best punters in the country this year. I think Jonathan Dorr, it's all about his head. If he can get his head on straight, he's a really good kicker. The question for me is, can they get anything out of the return game? I think that, to me, Allison, is still the big question about just how good the special team is going to be. Can they get the return game going? And if they can, then I think the special teams could be really good, because I expect the coverage units to be really good. I think Jay Bramlett's going to be really good, and I think Jonathan Dorr is going to bounce back after a rough finish to last season. Justin Nagel asks, how do you think the rushing touchdowns will be split between our stable of running backs? Estimated on the goal line, I see him snagging up some beat Sebo snaps. I wouldn't write off Sebo just yet. Sebo's a battler. That kid's been overlooked and trying to get forced out of the lineup his whole career, and he keeps battling, he keeps hanging in there. So I would not write off Sebo just yet. But Estime and Logan Diggs are both going to have that opportunity to compete there. I still think it's going to be a Kyron and Chris Tyree show, and then work a third guy in as a change of pace or as a breather. But I think that if you look at it, say, I would like to see them get 30 to 35 touches a game to the backs, at least 30, 35 touches. And then if you look at it and say, 20 of those go to Chris, to Kyron Williams, 12 to 13 of those go to Chris Tyree, and then maybe 2 to 5 if you get past 35, those 2 or 3 can go to somebody else, and then if you get past 35, those touches can continue to go to that guy. But I think you need to get Kyron Williams at least 15 touches a game. I think you need to get Chris Tyree at least 10 touches a game. That's the sweet spot for me. And then if they need a change, if they need a goal line guy, the problem with that though is, Justin, is Kyron Williams is pretty good in the goal line. We saw that last year because he's so short and he's got really strong legs that Kyron can kind of get underneath there and scoot into the end zone. Whereas Audrick's a little bit of a bigger body and a little bit of a cleaner target. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to stop him because he's a big boy. Same thing with Logan Diggs. But I don't think it's a given that you don't want Kyron Williams in the goal line. I think maybe if I were to go to my big boy package, I would sub him in. But if I'm in a kind of a normal 12 personnel in the goal line or still spread in the red zone, I'd keep Kyron in. But at the same time, the only way to me you play those freshmen is if they earn that role. And I think they're both capable of doing that. Joseph Salvatore says, have seen some on Twitter say that Notre Dame is backing off its top O-line targets after offering Craig any credence to this. No. If somebody's saying that, that is nothing but spin. They are not backing off top targets to go after Ashton Craig. Ashton Craig is a reaction to them falling behind potentially, or not even falling behind, but okay, you're not as confident that you're going to get those guys as you are now. And any good coach, any good recruiting staff, if you feel like you're fading, there's 2 reactions to that. If you feel like, hey, we were in a good place with the recruit and we're fading, this is going to happen to every coaching staff in the country. Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, everybody. So it's not unique to Notre Dame. If you're losing on a guy, you have 2 reactions. One is, okay, what do we got to do to get back with him is number 1. Number 2 is, how do we protect ourselves to make sure that we're still going to be okay here? That's when the offers come in. And so I like the Ashton Craig offer a lot. But anyone saying that, well, they just discovered him, and so now they don't want those other guys, that's spin. And I don't know if anyone's saying that. I don't see it. I'm just taking you for what you said. That would be spin. This is a smart coaching staff that feels that they're maybe fading with some guys that they thought they were going to get, looking for good players. That's what I think this is. And I'm not ready to write off those guys. I think they're still in it with Carson Hinsman. I don't know what's going on with Billy Schrauth. No clue. I think they're still in it with Joe Bruner. I'm not ready to say that they're going to miss on all those Wisconsin guys. The conversation at the beginning was if they miss on those guys. That's problematic. But I'm not ready to give into that. And I don't think the Notre Dame staff is giving into that. And just because they all offered other players doesn't mean that they've given up. It just means that they're smartly going after other players that are good players. And that, to me, is what Ashton Craig is. Look, plan B is not always a bad thing. And we had a conversation earlier and somebody made a comment. Look, Kyron Williams is not the only plan B that Notre Dame has landed. He's not the only plan B that's turned out to be a really good player. Myron Tungavaloa was a plan B. He was. He's a pretty good football player. Cam Hart was such a plan B that they didn't even recruit him to play corner. They had to move him because of issues of corner. I think he's got a chance to be a pretty good player. There's been a lot of players over the years that were plan B guys because they weren't your first recruit. Deshaun Kaiser was a plan B. He was not a guy that was the quarterback that they wanted in the first batch of pursuit. He just wasn't. That's okay. Plan B doesn't equal you can't play. And also, the other thing that people say, well, this guy got offered first, and so they like it. No, that's not it either. But the fact is Logan Diggs was a plan B. Audric Estime was a plan B. Those guys, Avery Davis is a plan B at receiver. They didn't recruit him a receiver. They recruited him as a running back. They had to move him out of need. He's a really good football player. So to me, plan B guys aren't necessarily not good football players. That's the thing I would say. And so that's why, I hope I'm making my point. I don't want to go too much into that, but I just think that we have to be able to look at that and say, but it's also okay to say, but they went for their plan B because they missed on their first guy. That's okay. But that's going to happen. Alabama's had. I mean, do you think Mac Jones is the only quarterback that Alabama won in that class? I'd have to go back and look, but I'd be a little skeptical about that. Joe says, I just logged on and I've already read that we missed out on Sawchuck and the kid that went to Ohio State. And now I have read on your show that Bradshaw's not visiting. What happened? I'm still trying to gather that. All I know is that Notre Dame canceled his visit. I don't have any information beyond that other than what Tom Loy is reporting. So if you want more intel on that, I would try to find what Tom is saying on that because I don't have any firsthand knowledge of that. So that's what I would do. But Sawchuck and Hayden are committed, but I think Notre Dame's okay there at running back. I really do. We'll see how it goes. They got to close, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, let's get to some final questions as we wrap up here. We have a Wisconsin fan in the room, everybody. All right, Richard Robinson, just saw a video of Dante Moore, 2023 quarterback. I see why you like him so much, Brian. Do Irish have a good chance to land him? Definitely a gap closer. I wouldn't say they have a good chance or not. I think they're in it. I think it's really early for him, and it's really early for a lot of these 2023 quarterbacks. So I don't know who they're going to end up with. I mean, I was actually talking about this with John Garcia of SI All-American yesterday, and I said, teams are going to get like the 12th or 13th ranked quarterback in the 2023 class, and fans are going to look at it and say, man, you got the 13th best quarterback class, and that guy's going to be a dude. This is an incredibly deep quarterback class. So, yeah, I would love to have Dante Moore, but, there's a lot of other quarterbacks who say, yeah, okay, maybe he might not be as good as Dante Moore, but that kid's really good. And if you put good players around him, that's a pretty good deal right there. Let's see here. A lot of you guys figured it out. All righty, let's just see what else we have here in the chat. And I appreciate everybody being part of this. Andy Roke just logged in because I saw they canceled Bradshaw's visit, and Shroff looks like he is headed to Wisconsin. Insert Dwight Schrute screaming gif. That's a good one. Let's see if we got some more questions here. Hey, Matt, and I appreciate this. I hear you on receivers. I'm trying to remain optimistic. And, buddy, I have no problem with that. I don't. You came here. You stated your case. And to be honest with you, there aren't a lot of people that have, and I'll say it, that don't have the guts to come back at me. If they disagree with me, most people just kind of run to another message board and cry or whine or say I'm mean. What I love about you is you came back. You not only made your first statement, but you came back with more. I love that. We agreed to disagree, right? Or I don't agree. I haven't agreed to disagree. I may change your mind. Who knows? But I'll say this. I hope you're right because that's better for Notre Dame. But I appreciate you being in the chat, man. I really do. And I appreciate the fact that you came at me. I like that. That's fun. You were respectful. You made your points. I made my points. And I think we can all agree that we hope you're right, that deal does work out, right? I hope it does work out because I also don't think that every coach should just be like, well, what's everybody else doing? Let's try to be like that. I mean, you need to have some creativity in what you do. And I'm not trying to say they need to replicate what LSU did or replicate what Alabama did, but I do believe, and I've always felt this, even when I was a receivers coach and a pass game coordinator, I want diversity of skill set at receiver. And I think that's always been true. If you look at most of the great receiving corps over the history of the game, a lot of times there's diversity. I mean, I think back all the way back into the 80s when you think of the Redskins receiving corps. You had Gary Clark was a really shifty, fast guy. You had Ricky Saunders was a quick, shifty guy. But then you had Art Monk, and then you had their tight ends. You had those big guys. And then, you think of what the Broncos had, and the Broncos had a bunch of small, fast guys. And when they get those big games, those small, fast guys, they weren't doing anything. You had Jerry Taylor, John Taylor and Jerry Rice, different types of players. You look at the St. Louis Rams, Torrey Holt and Isaac Bruce, very different players. Ricky Prohl, completely different player from those guys. You look at the Indianapolis Colts. Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne aren't very different from a size standpoint, but they played the game completely differently. And that's why I've always felt that. And I just feel like that's something Notre Dame needs. And not one, well, they're both the same kind of guy, but this guy's a little faster than that guy. That's not diversity to me of skill set. This guy's just a little better at something, but they're the same guy. I just feel like you need a different skill set. And it doesn't have to be big or small. It's just skill set. That's the key. That's the key. And I'm not killing you, man. I'm enjoying this conversation. I really am. I enjoy it. I love that you came into it, and I had fun with it, and I like when people do that. That's why I put every single one of your comments in here, and I'm going to put this one here too. I'm not trying to play devil's advocate more than I actually believe it, honestly, and that's good. Plus, as a fan, I'm trying to stay optimistic that even though some of the guys are big, they can still work the middle at the next level. And I hope you're right. I mean, that's the thing is that we can, at the end of the day, I hope you're right. But I've enjoyed it, Matt, and I'm going to put every single one of your comments on there, not to embarrass you or anything else, because I enjoy that. You came at me. I like that, man. I have much respect for you right now, and I appreciate that. And that's been fun, and I like that. I enjoy. Do I want these shows to kind of be nothing but back and forth debates? No, but difference of opinion is okay, because the fact of the matter is, I think I know what I'm talking about, and I think I've been right a lot. And we actually got a question about that. And if I didn't think I was right a lot, I'm going to change it. And times in the past I've been wrong, I'll look back and say, why did I miss on that kid? And I've changed my grading system over the years because I found that I had certain biases of skill set types that I was missing on. And you're going to laugh at this, but one of my biases was big receivers. I personally like big receivers. I want big receivers. I just don't only want big receivers. So I had to kind of change my grading scale to say, hey, look, I'm over liking these players, like Micah Jones is one. I was willing to overlook, not willing, but because of the bias I have towards bigger receivers, I would overlook certain aspects of Micah's game that you look back and say, okay, I see it now, but at the time I missed it because I loved the other parts that he brought to the table. And so I had to adjust my grading system to make sure that I can protect myself against some of those biases. And I have that at other positions too. And every evaluator has certain biases. Sometimes you know it, sometimes you don't. And so if you don't reflect, you're not going to know what your biases are. And so I always do that. And I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to be wrong. And I'm going to be open to that. But this is one of those things that I don't think I'm wrong about because, there's a history of that. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And then we actually had a question that came offline, and somebody said, he goes, it was a question from someone on Twitter. He said, I have a fun one. In your time on the ND beat, when have you gone against the narrative and gotten blowback? What have you been the most right about, and what have you been the most wrong about? As far as the narrative, I don't know what the narratives are. I don't read other people's work, so I don't know what narratives are for the most part. Things I've gotten blowback for, probably the biggest thing I got blowback for, the two biggest things are Phil Dracovic and Jeff Quinn. Three, and then Ian Book. Those are the three things, and I'm assuming I was going against the narrative because of the type of there's been some pretty nasty, especially on Twitter, some pretty nasty things that people will say at times. And a lot of people at the place I used to work, if they didn't agree with you, then they get personal and make insults. But those are the three things I probably have gotten the most blowback for, are those three opinions. I think the thing I was most right about, there's a couple things. Number one, from a negative standpoint, I didn't think it'd be as bad as it was. But I was concerned about 2016, and I used to rail against this, and I caught a lot of flack for this. I actually did get a lot of blowback for this, but I was really concerned about the strength conditioning program. I was really concerned about Brian Van Gorder. And even though Notre Dame went 10-3 and everybody's like, we were X amount of points away from being undefeated. I said, I get all that, but I'm telling you, there's problems. Nobody believed me. And then they went 4-8. I was right about that. And I actually said on Bill King's show before the season that I said about that Notre Dame team, either it's going to all click and that team's going to be really good, or it's going to implode. Now, when I meant implode, I meant like 6-6 implode. I didn't think 4-8. But I said before the season that's how worried I was, and I ended up being right, unfortunately. Although it kind of forced it because then it caused Kelly to make some changes that ended up working out. The thing I was most wrong about, I thought the 2011 team was going to be really good. I looked at it and I was like, you had Harrison Smith had a great year the year before, and he was still pretty good in 2011. You had Michael Floyd, you had Tyler Eifert, you had all these veteran offensive linemen coming back. You had Dane Christ, you had Tommy Reese, a quarterback. Tommy went undefeated late in the year. You got all these good running backs. You got good defensive linemen. I thought that 2011 team was going to be really good, and I was wrong. I mean, I got blown up in the first game. They lost to a South Florida team that I think went like 5-7 or something like that year. That was one I was really, really wrong about. So those are the two things. I did predict. I was actually one of only two people that predicted Notre Dame to beat LSU in 25. Two people on Notre Dame beat, because that is one thing I did look at, because somebody said, you're the only person that predicted Notre Dame. And so I had a buddy of mine say, hey, who did everybody predict? And we found that one other person predicted Notre Dame, but I predicted Notre Dame to beat LSU that year and the other year too. So I got those ones right. And I've gotten some wrong. And look, the thing about me is I don't have a problem talking about it. If I'm actually wrong and I think I'm wrong, I'll say it and we'll have a conversation about it. Okay, so Paul says, for the record, my surname is pronounced Benoit. See, I was right, correct? Didn't I say that yesterday? So I did get that right. Thank you very much for that. Brian Meadows, good show. God bless. Thank you for joining, Brian. Paul Benoit says, hey, guys, great show. I know you're not high on Alec Ayamanor have stated there's very little film on him. What are you seeing in the film that does exist that makes you skeptical? It's not that I am not high on him. I want to make sure I'm clear on this. I don't have a lot of film on him, so it's hard for me to make a strong like him or don't like him type of opinion on him, okay? My concern with him is more about what I do see from him. He's exactly the same kind of player that they're already recruiting. That's my concern. He's 6'3", he's big, and he's a guy that does damage before the catch and at the point of the catch. He's not a lot different than Morgan Walker. He's not any different than CJ Williams. He's not really any different than Tobias Merriweather. There's just level of who's better at it. So it's not that I don't like him. And it's kind of like KJ Winston. I was very hesitant to make a really firm opinion on KJ Winston because I just don't have a lot of film of him. And this kid is the same way. There's just not a lot of good film of him. And what I've seen has been good. It just doesn't blow me away. But that doesn't mean he hasn't improved. And there's all types of things. There's all types of reasons where the kid could get better. I have nothing against the kid. I think he's a good football player. I think Nick Anderson's a good football player. I just don't think they're as good as Tobias Merriweather or even CJ Williams to a degree, although some of them may have higher ceilings than CJ. It's more about they're the same dude. And like they're all the same guy. They all do the same things on the football field. And that's my question. That's a good question. But I hope I'm clear on that. I don't necessarily have an issue with this kid from Canada. It's more about just style of play. I don't have a firm opinion on him yet. That's why I haven't offered a grade of him yet. I haven't graded him yet because there's just not enough film for me to have a grade of him. I'm going to be releasing my receiver board soon, and he's going to be on it at the very bottom under a different cat. He's not going to be ranked with the others because there's just not enough film for me to put a fair grade on him compared to other players. And so, but what I do know of him is again, it's more about the skill set and how it relates to the other receivers. I hope that makes sense. Like if they took him over CJ Williams because they saw him in person and they think he's bigger and stronger and they have more access to film, okay, I'll have some skepticism because I just haven't seen it yet, but I'll be open to that in the fall. I'll be open to seeing that in the fall. But that doesn't change my overall problem with the receiving core in general, which is you really only have one dynamic player in that group, and that to me is Tobias Merriweather. But even then, all four of those guys are the same guy, in my opinion. Brian Meadows says, I think Jeff Quinn might have learned something last year about the run game, and he's a pass game coach, and recruiting could be better, but nobody wins them all. We will be fine. I hope you're right, Brian. I hope you're right. I do. I really do. Doug says, I looked at the prices for going to the Purdue game in section 27, 28, 29, lower up to 1,300. I think people really miss not being in the stadium. And there's going to be people trying to take advantage of that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Liam asks, if we get Singleton, maybe he can play in the slot a little like Ricky Waters did. Completely different kind of athlete, in my opinion. The other thing is Nick Singleton, I think, has 16 career catches in 3. He has 4,200 rushing yards. He has 16 career catches. I think all of them out of the backfield. So maybe he could do that, but there's no evidence that he can do it. He's a running back, and that's fine. That's all good. He's a really good running back. I think he can catch. I mean, they plays in an option offense, so he's catching pitches all the time. But if he's making plays in the pass game, it's going to be like screens and swings and arrow routes, a lot of stuff that Tony Jones Jr. did. I think he can do that. Again, I haven't seen him do it a lot, but if he can catch, running backs usually have good hands, not always, but usually have good hands. Kids that play in option offenses usually have good hands, but it's going to be more like the traditional stuff, not the slot stuff. I think that would not be using his skill set to the best of its ability. Let's work through some more questions here, and we'll wrap up here soon. Oh, Grim, we can't go 3 yards in a cloud of dust like the 60s. And they tried it last year, and it worked in most games. Brian, okay, when you were coaching, did you have one recruit you were close with and didn't get? I had several. You're going to miss more than you get in recruiting. You don't recruit 5 guys and get 4 of them. Nobody does that. It's not about that he's going to miss guys. Again, first of all, if you listen to the entire show, I'm the one saying, let's let it play out, okay? The second part of it is you don't lose it over a coach missing a guy. And what I said last year when Lance Taylor missed Will Shipley, I didn't say they're screwed a running back. I said your strategy was bad, but how do you finish? Because it's always about how you finish. And yet they missed on Will Shipley. They missed on a lot of running backs early in the process last year. They made some mistakes. They didn't go after Travion Henderson, in my opinion. I think they might have had a shot with him. Probably wouldn't have beat Ohio State, but you might have had a shot. But you rebounded and you got good players, and I'm fine with it. The issue here, Brian, however, it's a pattern. It's now happened. If they don't finish strong on the O-line, then the pattern is that you're able to get 1 or 2 really good ones, but then after that, it's a big drop off. That's a bad pattern. But it's not over yet. And the reality is he technically hasn't missed on any of the guys that he hasn't missed on Jake Taylor. He hasn't missed on Zach Rice. He hasn't missed on the 3 Wisconsin guys. They're all still uncommitted. And if Jake Taylor commits to Oklahoma tomorrow, if you love the kid, keep recruiting him. If Billy Schrouth or Carson Hinsman or Joe Bruner commit to Wisconsin or Ohio State, keep recruiting them. That's what you should do. But they haven't missed on those guys. It's just not trending in their direction. But we've seen kids trending in a different direction. Notre Dame staff rebounds, and they get the job done. That's part of recruiting. It's not a deal where, like, I have a buddy that always, and I love him to death. We've been friends for over 10 years, but he's always asking me, who's the kid's leader? And I'm like, okay, who'd he visit last? Like, it's too early in the process. Plus, your leader's going to be different from week to week with a lot of these kids, especially if you have a lot of schools you like. If you're looking at Wisconsin, Ohio State, and Notre Dame, and you're an offensive lineman from Wisconsin, I'd imagine that you're going to have 3 different leaders at different times throughout your entire recruiting process. What matters is, are you the leader at the end? And that's the key. So just because these kids are maybe trending away from Notre Dame doesn't mean at the end of the day they're still not going to get Notre Dame. And that's why I say let it play out. And that's why we had an over-under at the very beginning before I even said anything about it. Let it play out. But you can't just dismiss it always as we're going to be fine. That's the same kind of thing people said to me before 2015, 2016. Oh, they're going to be fine. Look what they did last year. We can't have our heads in the sand, right? We have to be able to objectively look at things. And one way of doing that is to be critical when it's needed. But the other one is to say, hey, look, yeah, it's not looking good, but let's let it play out. But then if it plays out in a bad way, you need to be able to say, maybe they'll be fine, but maybe not, because they're not recruiting the way that they were. And we have to be able to be honestly say that. But that doesn't mean that again, they haven't missed yet. Those guys are still all on the board. I mean, if you were the leader once, another school's kind of the hot program, that doesn't mean you can't get that kid back. Okay? We've seen it recently. So, again, let it play. I think I'm still under the 20, but let it play out. Matt D says maybe Ashton Craig is thought to be a depth player in the event they either want to add a 5th O-line commit, or in case they miss on one of the beginning guys, maybe it's not because we are missing. No, I think it is because they're missing, and again, not missing, but not trending. But I'm going to say this again, okay? And I want everybody to hear me. I have no problem with Notre Dame offering Ashton Craig. I'd have no problem with Notre Dame offering Ashton Craig if they still thought they were going to get Billy Schrouth and Carson Hinsman. If you want to bring him in as your fifth offensive lineman and play him at tackle, or maybe you play him inside and you want to try Billy Schrouth at tackle, cool. I like kids like Ashton Craig. I said that about Ashton Craig last week when I thought Notre Dame was still in a great position with all three of the Wisconsin kids, especially Schrouth and Hinsman. So, but I also don't think it's a negative thing that they are going after him, because that's good coaching. That's good recruiting. If you are going to miss, what's your plan B? You better have a good plan B. And I think Ashton Craig is a good plan B, just like Kyron Williams ended up being a really, really good plan B. Just like a lot of other players have turned out to be good plan Bs. Ian Book was a plan B. That's okay. Alabama's had guys that were really good that were plan Bs. That's just part of the game. And so it's not a bad thing, Matt, that he is a plan B. But I think that what they're doing that is smart is that if they are feeling – because, look, if Tom – I haven't seen Tom do this. I haven't seen Tom report that. This is what I was told. I was told that Tom Loy said that it's not looking good for Wisconsin. If Tom didn't report that, then my apologies to Tom. It's not so much about the specific, but what I'll say is if Tom is reporting that, then that's a sourced story. There are people on the Notre Dame side of things that aren't optimistic. He's not just making that up. He's not just saying that to get clicks. I don't believe he would do that. So there clearly is some concern, but what I like about it is they're not waiting until they miss to expand the board. So go after Ashton Craig, okay? That's good, because then you can get him and he can be your fifth lineman like you said. But it doesn't mean they're giving up. I guess that's what – it doesn't mean they're giving up on those other kids. It just means if they do miss, they're going to be okay. They're going to go get this kid, right? To Brian Meadows' point, they're going to be fine. I don't necessarily think that's we'll have to see it play out, but I think that's good strategy. I mean, that's what you have to do. You miss out on certain guys, like cornerback. Notre Dame wanted Kamari Rogers. They didn't miss on him, but the board has expanded to the point where they're still going to be fine. We don't even talk about Kamari Rogers anymore. All righty. Let's see here. Some D-Rock, the reminder to hit the like button, subscribe, and the notification bell. I would really appreciate that. We've actually had a bigger audience in there today than I thought we would, so I appreciate that. Let's see. Yeah, this is very true, Sid Irish. Recruiting is maddening sometimes. It absolutely is. Jesse Ferguson with a good question. Between Davis, Keys, and Lindsey, who do you think has the most upside? Jesse, this is a great question, and I can't answer it one way because it kind of goes back to what I've talked a lot about with the receiver is upside at what? I think those are three kind of different players. Avery Davis is more of kind of like a running back in a receiver's body. I think Lawrence Keys is a Devontae Smith type of guy. Not as good as Devontae Smith, but the same type of player. Great route runner, can stretch the field even if he's not a burner, can do some damage after the catch as well. And I think Braden Lindsey's a pure home run guy, right? Braden Lindsey's not the kind of guy that I'm necessarily talking about as being the diverse skill set to the bigger guys. Lawrence Keys is more of a diverse skill set. Avery Davis is more of a diverse skill set. Braden Lindsey's more of his best work is kind of done before the catch. What he brings to the table, however, is he can give you some jet sweeps and some reverses that those bigger guys can't. So he's a little bit of a hybrid. But if you're talking to me who has the most upside to be a dynamic home run hitter, it's Braden Lindsey. If it's who has a chance to be a sort of a versatile Swiss Army knife, that's what you're looking for, it's Avery Davis. Who has the best chance of that group to be a more every down player, more of a volume guy? I'd say it's Lawrence Keys. So they all do different things. It depends on what your need is to answer that question. So if you're who has the most upside as a home run hitter, Braden Lindsey. That's kind of what I'm referring to. Matthew, very appreciate the interactions as well. Love the show and love talking Notre Dame football. Getting some feedback from you on my thoughts is a ton of fun for me. Look forward to listening every day. And I appreciate you being a part of it. And I appreciate you taking that all in stride. And again, it was a good show. And like I said, at the end of the day, I hope you're right. David Knight, patting himself on the back, talking about his wife. She's an African model. Not sure how I managed that. Sounds like you overachieved, my friend. Well done. Well done. And don't ask yourself. The more you think about it, the more concerning it becomes. Just enjoy the fact that you were able to pull it off, buddy. That's all I'd tell you to do. All right, let's get back to some questions here. Roderick says, I've learned not to get too excited before ink hits paper on recruits. Case in point, Lorenzo Booker and Reggie Bush and Eddie Vanderdoes. And in Eddie Vanderdoes' case, the ink did hit the paper and still didn't work. And yeah, it is a roller coaster ride for sure. You look at a week ago, we're excited and top 5 class, and now everybody's acting like Notre Dame's going to have a terrible class. I mean, that's just the emotions that recruiting brings on the table. That's why I'm trying to be to lob the criticism that need to be lobbed, but then also to say, let's let it play out. Is anybody counting? What am I up to now on let it play out? Okay, so we're at 10 as of 4:12, so we're getting kind of close. Hopefully, we're going to wrap it up here soon. I'll get some last questions. Sky Shark, this is a great way to sort 9mm cases. Another 3 hours. I just realized that I actually have my one of mine down there, but yeah, that I've done that before. I put a podcast on, and I'll either, if I'm going to go to the range, I'll get my magazines ready and all that. Put a podcast on while I'm getting all that ready and making targets or whatever. So yeah, I'm glad I could help. I'm glad I could help with that. Corey D, anything new to receiver recruiting? Are we still taking the Canadian receiver who has 0 scholarship offers from any other major program other than Notre Dame? My understanding is he's a take for Notre Dame. Actually, I asked this the other day, and yes, he is a take for Notre Dame. As far as any other offers from major programs, I don't worry about that. If they evaluate him and he's as good as they think he can be, then I don't worry about that. And there's some skill there. Again, my issue isn't him per se. It's his style of play compared to what else they have. John Long, would a poor receiver class be enough for BK to look at Dell without blurred vision? The problem is I don't think they think it's a bad receiver class. If they get Tobias they really think Amorian Walker's a really good player. They really do. They don't view that as a miss. They really think Nicholas Anderson's a really good player. They really like the A.M. Minor kid. So the problem is they wouldn't view it that way. They wouldn't view it that way. So I'm at 15, so I'm still under. So I got to be careful that we don't go on the over on that. Brandon says, Craig, Hinsman, Shrouth, Chan, and Tanona, feelings about that class where there seems to be only one true tackle. Would that change their 2023 O-line recruiting strategy? You think is just get straight dudes? So, I'd love that class. I mean, that Brandon, if they finish with that group of 5, that's a great offensive line class. And yeah, there's only one true tackle, and that's Chan. But I actually like Ashton Craig at tackle. I know they're recruiting him inside, but I actually like him at tackle. He's got to put some meat on his bones, but that's true inside as it is outside. I think he's long. I like him at tackle. And I've said this before. I know Billy Shrouth plays tackle or plays guard in high school. I'd give Billy Shrouth a shot at right tackle. I really would. I think he's got the length for it. He's got the athleticism for it. And then Joey Tanona's a guy that could play right tackle in a pinch. So yeah, you may only have one, true tackle per se. I think Craig's a pure tackle. So I think you'd have 2, even though they're not recruiting them to play tackle. And I think you have at least 4 guys in the class that could play tackle. The only guy that wouldn't play tackle is Hinsman. That's the only one. All righty. Brandon said this is maddening. He said, hopefully we can turn it into a verb if Kane Madden becomes a straight stud this year. Maddening. That'd be awesome. I'm gonna remember that one and give you credit for it. Let's see here. D-Rock, recruiting Eagles stock market, ups, stationary, or down? Yeah, and you want to be always trending up, and you need to close. That's the other thing is you got to be able to close. And then Jeffrey says, Jeffrey Rohrabacher, if you look at pictures of Craig, you can see how long his arms are, put some good weight on him, and there's some upside. Yeah, agree. I said it last week. I'll say it now. I like Ashton Craig. If Notre Dame bounces back, and let's just say that what we're talking about is true, right? What's being reported is true. They're fading with Hinsman. They're fading with Shrouth. If they can bounce back and Bruner, if they can just get one of those guys, and then you get Ashton Craig, it's not an elite offensive line class, but it's a pretty good offensive line class. I like Ashton Craig. I say this, and I mean it. I don't believe this to be true at skill positions, but when it comes to lines, give me a raw, high-ceiling kid any day of the week. I don't want 5 of them, but if you give me a Joe Alt 1 year and a Ashton Craig the next year and another Joe Alt the next year and an Ashton Craig the next year, and that's your 4th guy in consistent 4-man classes, I'm good with that. I'm good with that. And I don't care about recruiting. I don't care about his 3-star. I don't care about offers and all that kind of stuff. There's been some elite first-round offensive linemen that didn't have Alabama offers, that didn't have Notre Dame offers. So you find a kid with that high ceiling. You all know I'm a ceiling guy. Give me the high ceiling guy over the 6'6", 300-pound high school senior that's got a lower ceiling but a higher floor. I like ceilings. Unless you need a kid to play right away, give me the ceiling. To me, Ashton Craig has a very, again, I don't mean like Liam Eichenberg, Ronnie Stanley type of ceiling. Maybe he's that, but I'm not saying that. That'd be a huge jump. But could he be a guy that could be a 2-3 year starter on a really good offensive line? Heck yeah. Heck yeah. So again, I think this is number 17. Let it play out. Let's see how it looks. And then we can evaluate it for how it ends. Because here's the deal. To D-Rock's point, recruiting is a roller coaster. All that matters at the end of the day, it's not even about who you missed on. It's who you get. Did the players you get help you pan out to be a team to compete for a title? If they get Devin Moore and Benjamin Morrison, they didn't land any elite corners. Did they get a cornerback group that can help you win a title? Absolutely. If they get a certain offensive line class, you can say, well, man, they missed on Zach Rice. They missed on Jake Taylor. They missed on this guy. They missed on this guy. Don't care. Is it a line class that gives you a chance to go out there and have an elite offense down the road? That's all I care about, right? I mean, Xavier Bradshaw's a really low-ranked 3-star kid. I'd be thrilled about that, right? I mean, I don't care about recruiting rankings. I don't care about who you missed. I care about the group you put together. At the end of the day, that's how you should be evaluated. Because as D-Rock said, it's a roller coaster. A week ago, we're talking about how great things are. This week, people are discouraged and frustrated with how things are going. To me, you just look at it and you say, at the end of the day, who'd you get? That's what matters to me. Not who you missed on, but who you got. I believe in 3-4 years, no one's going to be talking about how Notre Dame missed on Will Shipley. No one's going to be talking about it because Lance Taylor bounced back in impressive fashion, even if they don't get Nicholas Singleton. But if they get Nicholas Singleton, even more so. And that doesn't mean Will Shipley won't be a really good player. It's just let it play out. And then we'll evaluate. And you all know, if it's not up to par, I'm going to say it. But let's just let it play out first before we kind of all proverbially lose our minds, including me, because I'm frustrated with some things going on. But I also need to say, okay, we voice our frustrations. We vented. Now let's step back and let it play out and hope that the coaches are going to step up and get it done. So Matt says I'm at 19, so I will not say it again. Will not say it again. Actually, I can say it one more time. Take a deep breath. Enjoy the rest of your day. Let it play out. And then we'll see how things go. So that's where we're at with this. So that's 20. Not going to say it again because I'm not going to go over. All right. But I appreciate everybody joining the show today. I think that this has been a fun show. We got some venting out. We had some fun topics, some other topics that weren't good. A lot of back and forth. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to talk a little recruiting tomorrow. We'll do a preview of the visit, maybe a couple other topics that we discuss before we get to the questions. But it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate everybody coming here. Matthew, thanks for bringing some debate to the show today. That was a lot of fun. I really appreciate that. Thanks for everybody joining the show. Make sure you check out irishbreakdown.com for the latest. I have a midweek musings up today where I talk about the state of running back recruiting at Notre Dame, where they are right now in this class. Look, I went where all the guys were ranked in the Brian Kelly class, who the top rated rushers were. It's kind of a running back oriented show, a midweek musings today. I also talked about the best running backs that I think Notre Dame is going to face this year. We also have a scouting report on our site about Jarrett Patterson from Ryan Roberts. He broke down the Jarrett Patterson and projecting him in the NFL. Really good stuff. There's some clips in there. Really, really good stuff. Check that out. And, of course, we'll have some more stuff. And I'm going to have here either tonight or tomorrow, I'm going to have an article. I had an article yesterday talking about sort of the dream class that I see at receiver, which isn't going to happen now because they're not recruiting Xavier Bradshaw. So who that would be on defense, that kind of thing. And so we'll talk about all that and have a lot to talk about tomorrow. So make sure you join me. 1:00 Eastern. We'll be there. I'm not going to have a show tonight. To be honest with you, I'm worn out, and I don't have the stamina to have another show tonight. So we're not going to do a PM show this week. I apologize for that, but I just don't have the energy to do it this week. I need to get some rest today, and my voice is still recovering a little bit. So, but I do appreciate everybody being part of the show today. Make sure you check out Irish Breakdown, and we'll all talk again here very, very soon. But I love this community. Hit the like button before you go. We're having a lot of fun. We're going to keep it growing, and we're going to be rocking and rolling. So, my man CW, thanks again, Coach. I appreciate you being part of it. Corey D, thanks for being part of the show. Everybody have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you again very, very soon.